Chapter 1, Part 1, A Hole in the Wall. The ceiling dripped again, same spot, same slow rhythm like it had somewhere better to be but couldn't quite get there. Plop. Then a pause long enough to make you think maybe it stopped. Plop. The aluminum pan underneath caught each drop with a hollow metal slap. The water in it had turned the color of weak coffee, stained with years of ceiling dust, crumbled plaster, and whatever rat shit was festering the walls above. Jermaine, though nobody called him that, not even in school, not even Auntie Alicia, sat cross-legged on the living room floor, a balled-up hoodie covering his skinny frame like armor. His name in these streets, even at 6 years old, was just Maine, small, dark-skinned, with sleepy eyes that already looked tired of the world. The TV, sitting crooked on a milk crate, fuzzed and rolled with static like it had the hiccups. The antenna was held together with a bent coat hanger and a piece of string Maine had found behind the building dumpster. Half the time the picture came in like ghosts fighting underwater, colors bleeding together in a shaky dance. And right now, some off-brand cartoon, maybe Felix the Cat or Tom and Jerry, he couldn't tell, was halfway playing across the screen. But Maine wasn't really watching. His eyes were on the TV, yeah, but his brain was on the ache deep in his belly. The kind of ache that wasn't sharp like a punch, but low and dragging like it wanted to crawl out through his ribs and go find food without him. His mother lay stretched out on the sagging couch, one leg on, one leg off, her foot bare except for chipped pink toenail polish that hadn't been fresh in months. Her sweatpants were rolled down low on her hips, and the oversized t-shirt she had on didn't do much to cover her. Her arm hung off the side like she'd melted there. Track marks ran up and down her skin like some evil kid had drawn on her with a ballpoint pen and never stopped. The burnt spoon lay on the floor near her foot, next to a lighter and an empty glassine baggie that still had powder dusting the inside. Maine didn't bother waking her, not right away. He pulled his hoodie tighter, tucking his hands into the sleeves to warm them up. The radiator in the corner hissed like it had a secret, but it stayed stone cold, same as it had all November. Through the cracked living room window, he could hear the city breathing, sirens, dogs barking 2 blocks over, a car horn blaring and then getting cut off short like maybe somebody finally had enough. Down the hall, the neighbors were fighting again. Mr. Howard yelling at his girl, plates breaking. Maine stood up slow, joints popping like he was an old man. He walked over to the window ledge where a cracked jelly jar sat full of change, mostly pennies, a couple nickels, 1 dime. He shook it, listening to the sad clink of metal on glass. Not enough for a bag of chips, let alone anything real. He turned back toward the couch. Ma, his voice came out hoarse, like it hadn't been used all day. Nothing. He walked over, nudged her shoulder with 2 fingers like he was scared she might break. Ma, I'm hungry. Her face turned halfway toward him. Eyelids fluttered, heavy and slow, but didn't open. A wet sniff came from her nose, followed by a low animal grunt like she'd fallen down some dream hole and couldn't climb out. Maine stood there a second longer, heart thumping a little harder than it should have, but then he let it go. On the stained carpet near her foot was a crumpled dollar bill, green faded almost gray. Maine grabbed it quick, like somebody might snatch it back from him if he hesitated. The fridge in the corner of the tiny kitchen was humming but empty, except for a half-used box of baking soda and 2 sticky ketchup packets shoved in the butter tray. He didn't even check the cabinets. He already knew better. In the hallway, the air changed, thick with piss like always, mixed with the sour rot of garbage that had been sitting too long on the first floor. The light above the stairs had been out for weeks. Somebody ripped the bulb right out the socket, probably sold it for a dime rock. Maine tiptoed past old Mr. Earl, who was curled up on the landing, wearing 3 coats and mumbling to himself in his sleep. When Maine pushed open the building's front door, the cold Harlem wind slapped him across the face like an insult. It made his eyes water, but he didn't cry. Not for cold, not for hunger, not for nothing. He shoved his hands deeper into his sleeves and started walking toward the corner store, dollar bill clenched tight like it was the last piece of the world that belonged to him. Chapter 1, Part 2, Mommy's Visitors. Summary: Maine hides in the closet while his mother entertains a man. He listens, scared, stomach hurting. After the man leaves, Maine checks for leftover food. The store didn't take food stamps for candy. Maine stood on his tiptoes, flattening the wrinkled dollar bill on the counter with both palms like he was ironing it with body heat. The Arab guy behind the counter, he didn't know his name, just called him boss man like everybody else, snatched the bill up like he expected it to disappear any second. Maine pointed at the honey bun in the little plastic display near the register and then grabbed a quarter water. Red, because red was always better than purple. "Dat it, lil' man?" boss man asked, already bagging it. Maine nodded fast. Didn't want to risk the man changing his mind. He hustled back to the building, ducking past a couple older kids smoking looses on the stoop. One of them called out, "Yo, Maine, bring me a soda next time." Maine didn't answer, kept his head down. By the time he got upstairs and back into the apartment, his mother was sitting up on the couch now, eyes half open but glassy, her skinny frame hunched forward like she might fold in half. "Where you been?" she asked, voice dry and cracked. "Store," Maine mumbled, heading straight for the bedroom with his honey bun and drink like it was stolen property. He didn't make it 2 steps before she called out, "Leave me a piece." Maine froze in the doorway, closed his eyes tight for a second, then broke the honey bun in half and left the bigger piece on the coffee table near her lighter. She didn't say thank you. Later that night, Maine curled up in his spot. His bedroom wasn't really a bedroom. It was more like a closet with a mattress on the floor and a thin curtain hung over the door frame. The carpet smelled like feet and cigarettes. Maine lay there in the dark, staring at the ceiling, listening to the noises that meant it was nighttime in Harlem. Car alarms, sirens, the elevator in the building clanking like chains. Then, footsteps, boots this time, heavy ones. Maine heard the door open slow. It creaked bad, needed oil months ago. A deep voice laughed low, like a snake slithering under the door. Yo, Angie, open up. You know what time it is." Maine's stomach sank. He rolled out of bed fast, pulling the curtain aside and slipping into the real closet on the far wall. It barely had room for him to crouch, but he made himself small, real small. Through the crack in the door, he could see the living room light glow across the floor. The man's boots stomped in, black Timbs scuffed up like they'd been through 100 fights. "You got that for me?" the man asked, voice low but mean. Maine could hear his mother shuffling around. Her voice mumbled like she was talking underwater. Words like tomorrow and short right now floated through the air. Then the man's voice rose, sharp. "Tomorrow my ass, you think I'm playing with you?" A slap cracked across the room. The sound shot straight through Maine's chest. He squeezed his knees tighter to his chest inside the closet, pressing his forehead against the wall. The smell of old shoes and mothballs filled his nose. His stomach growled again, but softer this time. Through the door crack, he saw the man push his mother back onto the couch. Her head hit the armrest with a thud. "Yo, stop playing with me. I'll be back tomorrow night. You better have something for me." Another slap, then a pause, then the unmistakable sound of a zipper. Maine squeezed his eyes shut, covered his ears, started counting backwards from 100 in his head like he always did when things got loud. 99, 98. The couch spring squeaked. The man grunted low like a dog with something stuck in its throat. Maine stayed in the closet, stayed small, stayed silent. By the time it got quiet again, Maine's legs had gone numb from crouching so long. He waited until he heard the door slam and footsteps going down the stairs. Then he waited another 5 minutes just to be sure. When he finally crawled out, the living room smelled like sweat and something worse, something sharp and sour. His mother was still on the couch, her arm draped over her eyes like she was shielding herself from the world. Maine crept over to the coffee table. On it sat half a sandwich, soggy. The bread torn like somebody had taken one bite and tossed it aside. Maine grabbed it anyway, shoved it into his mouth, chewed fast like he was afraid she might wake up and take it back. She didn't move. He stood there for a second, wiping crumbs off his face with the sleeve of his hoodie. Then he went back to his closet, pulled the curtain shut behind him, and lay down with his back pressed hard against the wall like it could hold him together. Chapter 1, Part 3, The Church Lady. Summary: Ms. Dolores from the local church stops by with a small bag of food. She offers Maine a sandwich and talks briefly to his mom, who's barely awake. Maine is polite but doesn't trust kindness. The next morning came slow. Not with sunlight or birds or any of that TV shit, just with noise. Kids running in the hallway, sneakers slapping hard against linoleum. Somebody 2 floors up blasting Curtis Mayfield so loud the bass shook the walls like a low earthquake. Maine opened his eyes to the same dark corner, the same smell of dust and old socks. His stomach still knotted with hunger, still waiting for something solid. The TV in the living room was still on, stuck on some morning talk show with 2 white ladies laughing about nothing important. His mother hadn't moved much from the night before. Same position on the couch, one arm thrown over her face like she was blocking out life. Maine walked barefoot to the kitchen sink and let the water run cold before cupping some in his hands and drinking it straight from his palms. Cold, flat, but it filled the space for a minute. That's when he heard the knock. 3 quick taps followed by 1 slow one. Maine froze, eyes darting to the door. Not the landlord, not a dealer, not one of her friends. They all just barged in. Another knock. Angie, it's Dolores from the church. Maine's shoulders dropped just a little. He knew that voice. Miss Dolores always knocked like that. Always spoke soft like she didn't want to wake a sleeping dog. Maine unlocked the door and cracked it open. Miss Dolores stood there in her oversized church sweater, gray at the edges, with 2 paper bags in her hands and a tired but gentle smile on her face. "Hey, baby," she said, looking him over from head to toe. "You getting taller on me, huh?" Maine shrugged but stepped aside to let her in. The smell of outside, fresh air mixed with laundry soap and cigarette smoke, rushed in with her. Miss Dolores set the bags down on the tiny, wobbly kitchen table. "Brought y'all some things," she said, pulling out a loaf of bread, a jar of peanut butter, some canned soup, and a small pack of bologna sealed tight with a yellow sticker. Maine's eyes locked on the bread first. White bread, soft. Miss Dolores followed his stare and smiled again. "Go on, baby. Make yourself a sandwich." He didn't need to be told twice. He grabbed the loaf, pulled out 2 slices, slapped on bologna with no mayo, no mustard, no nothing. Just meat and bread and hunger. While he chewed fast and greedy, Miss Dolores walked over to the couch. "Angie," she said, tapping Maine's mother on the knee. "You hear me? I brought you something to eat." His mother shifted, eyes opening just a sliver. Miss Dolores crouched low. "I ain't here to preach. Just here to help." Maine watched from the kitchen, chewing slower now, the taste of salt and processed meat heavy on his tongue. His mother made a soft grunt like she might say something, but no words came out. Miss Dolores stood back up, smoothed down her sweater. "All right, then," she said, voice sad but practiced like she'd done this same scene in 100 other apartments with 100 other women just like Angie. Before leaving, she turned to Maine. "You still coming by the church on Saturdays? We could use a strong boy like you to help set up chairs." Maine wiped his mouth with the back of his hand. "I'll try," he said, eyes down, already knowing he wouldn't. Miss Dolores nodded, like she expected that answer anyway. "You take care now, baby." And just like that, she was gone. The apartment felt smaller without her. Maine finished his sandwich in 3 bites and grabbed another piece of bread to eat plain. His mother rolled over, pulling a blanket tight over her head. The canned soup and the peanut butter would last a few days if she didn't trade it for dope first. Maine sat on the floor by the TV again, flipping the channels with the pliers they used because the knob broke off months ago. The cartoons were over, just static now. Chapter 1, Part 4, Stoop Education. Summary: Maine sits on the stoop, hungry but watchful. He observes the older boys hustling on the block. This is the first time he really notices C-money. Fresh clothes, loud voice, handing out dollars to kids. Maine watches fascinated. The seed of curiosity about the street game gets planted. By late afternoon, the air had changed. The cold was still there, sharp and biting every time the wind whipped down the avenue, but the block itself started moving different. The older boys were out now, loud, full of energy like they ran the whole zip code. Maine sat on the 3rd step of the stoop, elbows resting on his knees, chin tucked in his hoodie. He kept his eyes low but made sure they were working. Watch Chapter 5, Part 2, Keisha and Ashley. Summary: 2 key scenes, one with Keisha in Jersey. Intimate, emotional, feels like home. The other with Ashley and Philly, fast, fun, more physical than emotional. Both girls think Maine's around 19. Neither knows about the other. First stop, Jersey. Keisha's apartment sat on the second floor of a skinny brown building with chipped paint and crooked blinds. But inside, it smelled like cocoa butter and hair grease, and the TV was always on low in the background playing whatever was on BET. Maine knocked twice like he always did. Keisha opened the door wearing sweatpants and a tank top, her hair wrapped up in a scarf, but her smile wide and bright, like she'd been waiting on him all day. "About time you brought your ass over here," she said, stepping aside to let him in. Maine slid past her, dropping onto the couch like he lived there. Keisha curled up next to him without asking, wrapping her legs across his lap, leaning her head on his shoulder like this was their routine. "I was working," Maine said, half smiling, half tired. Keisha kissed his neck, soft and slow. "You always working." They sat like that for a minute, TV flickering. Keisha tracing circles on his chest with her fingertip. She didn't ask too many questions about the streets, not like other girls. She wasn't nosy, she was just there. Soft, familiar, always smelling good, always knowing when to stop talking and just let the silence settle. Later, when they were in her bedroom, she moved slow with him, like they had time. Like he wasn't 15 with a gun under his hoodie and stress sitting heavy in the back of his throat. Next day, Philly. Maine drove down the turnpike with music loud and windows halfway down, the cold air slapping his face just enough to keep him awake. Ashley was a whole different story. Thick, loud, pretty with sharp edges. She answered the door wearing tight shorts and a crop top, even though it was cold enough outside to see your breath. "You late," she said, pulling him inside by the front of his hoodie before he could even respond. Ashley's kisses were messy, hungry, all teeth and lip gloss and hands grabbing at his belt before the door even closed. With Ashley, there was no slow build. It was pull his pants down by the front door, hit the bedroom wall halfway dressed, teeth scraping skin, nails leaving little red trails on his back. After, she'd lay on her stomach scrolling through music videos, talking fast about whatever new drama she had going on, her friends, her hair, some other dude trying to get at her. Maine would lay there catching his breath, half listening, already checking the time in his head. Both girls thought he was 19. Both believed every lie he told them about where he was going and what he was doing. Neither had any idea about the other, and Maine, he didn't feel guilty, didn't feel like he was cheating, didn't feel much of anything about it. He just felt busy, like life was moving fast and slowing down for feelings wasn't part of the schedule. Chapter 5, Part 3, Shootouts and Scoreboards. Summary recap of 3 shootouts Maine survived over the past year, one on Lenox, one near St. Nick, and one during a dice game. Each written in real-time, adrenaline-fueled flashback. This section shows how numb Maine is becoming to violence. First one, Lenox Avenue. Summer night, block crowded. Music thumping out of a parked Cutlass, kids playing tag between double-parked cars. Maine stood near the hydrant, talking low with tone about flipping a half ounce. Didn't even hear the first shot, just felt the air change. The sound was more like a firecracker, then another, then screaming. People scattered, bottles dropped. Maine hit the ground behind a parked van before his brain even finished processing what was happening. Somebody let off at least 6 rounds from across the street, wild, sloppy, not aiming at nobody specific. When the shot stopped, Maine stayed down 5 more seconds, counted slow in his head, then popped up and ran full speed toward the alley, heart pounding, legs moving faster than they ever had. Afterward, when the street calmed, people started creeping back out like groundhogs testing the air. Maine stood near the corner, still shaking, trying to light a cigarette with trembling fingers even though he didn't even smoke like that. Second one, St. Nick, late fall, cold enough to see his breath. He was walking back from Keisha's crib, cutting through side blocks near the park when a blue Crown Vic pulled up slow. No headlights. 4 dudes jumped out. No warning, no argument, just hammers up, shots flying. Maine didn't think, just sprinted. Zigzagged through parked cars like he was running drills, ducking behind trash cans, hopping fences like his life depended on it, which it did. Bullets cracked the air inches past his head. One clipped a mailbox right next to him, throwing metal shards into his face. When he finally made it 3 blocks down and dove into Mr. Earl's hallway, he sat there on the cold tile, chest heaving, blood running from a tiny cut on his cheek. No tears, just breathing. Fast and shallow. Third one, dice game on 142nd. Broad daylight, money on the ground, dice bouncing, tension so thick you could chew it. Maine was up $200. Smile just starting to creep on his face when 2 masked dudes came around the corner with pump shotguns. "Everybody down!" Before they even finished the sentence, Maine dropped flat on his stomach, covering his head with both hands. Somebody panicked and pulled back. Gunshots erupted from both sides. Maine kept his face pressed to the pavement, cheek against cold concrete, listening to the scatter of feet and the boom of shotgun blasts tearing through the air. When it ended, 2 dudes were hit, one in the leg, another in the shoulder. Maine stayed down until somebody yelled, "They gone!" Then he stood, brushed dirt off his hoodie, and walked off like nothing happened. Now, riding through the city in his Benz, Maine thought about all 3 moments like they were pages from a comic book. Quick flashes, panels of violence. And here he was, still breathing, still moving, like this was just part of the game, part of the scoreboard. Chapter 5, Part 4, Quarterbird Routine. Summary: a day in Maine's life. Bagging up, counting money, managing small runners like Tone, making decisions about who gets work and who doesn't. Maine feels the weight of leadership and realizes people are depending on him now. The kitchen table was covered in sandwich bags, digital scales, and enough baking soda dust to make the whole room smell like bad science class. Maine sat at the head of the table, hoodie pulled over his head, sleeves pushed up to his elbows, counting bills into rubber-banded stacks. The window was cracked just enough to keep the air from getting too heavy, but not enough for neighbors to smell the work. Keisha was at the stove cooking scrambled eggs and frying up cheap hot dogs, moving around like none of this was strange. On the floor, Tone sat cross-legged, stuffing small baggies with practiced hands, licking his fingers every couple bundles like he couldn't help it. Maine glanced down at him. "Yo, stop licking your fingers. This ain't candy, little man." Tone laughed, wiping his hands on his jeans. "My bad, big bro." Maine shook his head, turning back to the money spread out in front of him. Today was Thursday. That meant he had to re-up by the weekend. They were moving about a quarter-bird a week now, sometimes more if the block stayed hot. Most of it moved hand to hand. The rest? He fronted out to a few low-level dudes trying to make a name for themselves. Maine grabbed his burner flip phone from the counter and scrolled through missed texts. "Lil Mel, yo, you got something for me? I'm dry stretch. Need 2 packs, cash ready. Unknown number. I heard you the one I need to holla at. Let me get on." Maine deleted that last one without replying. Randoms didn't get callbacks. He slid 2 bundles across the table toward Tone. "Go drop this with Stretch. Tell him I want my money back by Sunday night. No excuses." Tone grabbed the bundles like they were gold bricks, grinning wide. "I got you, bro." Maine nodded, watching him stuff the work deep into his coat before dapping him up. After Tone left, Maine sat back in his chair, rubbing his eyes. Counting money used to give him a rush. Now it just felt like math homework, stacks and flips, dimes turning into 20s, 20s into hundreds. But with every extra dollar came more people with their hands out, more dudes waiting on him, more mouths to feed, and more reasons for somebody to want him dead. Keisha walked over with a paper plate full of eggs and cut up hot dogs, setting it in front of him without a word. Maine nodded in thanks, but didn't eat right away. He just sat there, staring at the stacks of money, and wondering how long he could really keep this going. Chapter 5, Part 5. Pressure builds with John. Summary: Maine catches John giving him a side-eye while counting money with C money. Maine voices his distrust about John to C. C barely responds, just gives Maine a long, unreadable look. The distance between Maine and C grows. Maine pulled up to the spot on 139th, parked the Benz halfway on the sidewalk like he didn't care about tickets. The old brownstone they used as a stash was quiet from the outside, but Maine already knew the upstairs back room was jumping. Inside, the air smelled like money and gun oil. C Money sat at the table near the window, sleeves rolled up, counting through a fat stack of 20s like he was speed reading Braille. John stood off to the side, leaning against the wall, toothpick bouncing between his teeth, eyes half-lidded but sharp underneath. Maine stepped in, gave a quick nod to both. C looked up. "About time you showed up," C said, motioning toward an unopened duffel sitting on the floor. "That's yours. Go through it." Maine crouched down, unzipped the bag. Straight 20s, neatly stacked, smelled like sweat and fresh ink. As he counted, he felt it. That look, that slow sideways stare burning a hole in the side of his face. He didn't have to turn to know it was John. Maine kept his eyes on the money, but his stomach twisted like a bad knot. By the time he finished his count and zipped the bag closed, he stood up slow, locking eyes with John for the first time that night. John didn't flinch, just smirked, like he knew something Maine didn't. The room stayed quiet for half a beat too long. Then C broke it. "Y'all both acting like y'all got beef and ain't nobody said nothing." Maine took a breath, said it before he could second guess. "I don't trust him." The words dropped heavy. John's toothpick froze mid-chew. C-Money stopped flipping bills. Maine stayed standing, hands loose at his sides, ready for whatever reaction came next. C stared at him, long and hard, then went back to counting, like he hadn't heard a thing, like the whole conversation hadn't happened. John chuckled low under his breath and walked out the room, brushing past Maine just close enough to bump his shoulder on the way by. Maine didn't move, didn't blink, but inside, something shifted. The air felt different now, colder, like a door somewhere had started closing, and Maine wasn't sure he was on the right side of it anymore. Chapter 6, Part 1, The Inside Man. Summary: C-Money meets with a low-level snitch who's feeding them addresses of local hustlers with stashes in their apartments. John jokes about how easy it's been. Maine listens, uneasy but down for the ride. They met at a gas station off the highway, way out past White Plains where the trees got thick and the air didn't smell like bus fumes. The inside man pulled up in a busted gray Honda, with one hubcap missing and a back bumper held together with duct tape. Maine sat in the back seat of C-Money's BMW, hoodie pulled low, watching through the cracked window as the dude climbed out, looking both ways like he owed the whole world money. Small guy, skinny, face full of acne scars, wore a North Face that looked 2 sizes too big. "Yo, what's good?" the guy said, pulling his hoodie strings tight like it'd protect him from bad decisions. C-Money stepped out first, keeping his tone cool. "You got something for me, or we wassing gas?" John stood next to C, hands in his coat pockets, rocking back and forth on his heels like he was bored already. The inside man scratched his neck, glanced over at Maine but didn't say nothing to him. Then he reached into his jacket and pulled out a folded sheet of notebook paper. 3 spots, he said, handing it over. "First one's light. Second 2, y'all gonna eat." C unfolded the paper, glanced at the addresses and quick notes scribbled in blue ink. "Who these belong to?" "Couple small timers. Move little weight. Keep cash in the crib. Lot of jewelry too. Ain't nobody strapped heavy. Maybe a little. 380 or some dusty revolver at best." C nodded, tucking the paper into his jacket. The inside man shuffled awkward, rubbing his hands together like he was cold. "We still good on what you said, right? After the next 2? John laughed from the side, shaking his head. "Greedy ass," he said. C-Money just smiled. "You keep feeding me right. We keep feeding you right. Simple math." The dude nodded fast, climbed back in his Honda, and peeled off like the devil was riding shotgun. C and John climbed back into the BMW. Maine sat quiet in the back, eyes still on the now empty parking lot. John turned halfway in his seat, grinning back at Maine. "Yo, little man, we about to go shopping," he said with a laugh. "You ever kicked in a door before?" Maine shook his head. John smirked. "You gonna love this shit." C-Money fired up the engine, pulled onto the road, headed back toward Harlem. As the trees blurred past the window, Maine felt that same tight knot in his chest he always felt right before things got serious. But he didn't say nothing, just sat there, and waited to see how this next lesson would play out. Chapter 6, Part 2, First Door Kick. Summary: Maine, John, and Ant hit the first house in Yonkers. Maine wears a mask and sticks a gun in someone's face for the first time. They take cash, jewelry, and a pistol. Maine feels both adrenaline and a new kind of coldness settle inside. The ride up to Yonkers stayed quiet. Nobody played music. Nobody cracked jokes. Just the soft sound of tires humming against asphalt and the low creak of leather seats shifting as bodies moved. Maine sat in the back seat, gloved hands resting on his lap, ski mask balled up in his pocket, waiting for the word. C-Money drove slow, giving John directions like he was guiding him through a maze. After this light, hang a right, then second left after the gas station. Brown house, 2 stories, number 48 on the door. John nodded, checking the clip in his. 380 for the 5th time. Aunt sat up front, riding shotgun, chewing gum loud and racking the slide on his. 9 like he couldn't wait to use it. Maine pulled his mask over his head when they turned onto the block. His heart beat faster. Not scared exactly, but wired. Like all his senses were turned up to 10. They parked 2 houses down. C stayed in the car with the engine running, getaway ready. John and Aunt hopped out first, moving fast across the sidewalk. Maine followed, pulling his hoodie low over the mask. They climbed the stoop 2 steps at a time. John didn't waste time knocking. 1 hard kick. The door cracked loud, swinging open like it didn't want problems. Inside, a dude in basketball shorts and socks froze mid-step, holding a half-eaten sandwich, eyes wide like he'd seen death walk in. Maine barely had time to think. He raised his, 380, and pointed it dead at the guy's chest. "On the floor, face down, now!" John barked, already moving through the apartment like he'd rehearsed this 1,000 times. Aunt ran to the back room, yelling for anyone else inside. The dude dropped flat, hands spread on the carpet, sandwich still clutched tight between 2 fingers like his brain hadn't caught up with his body. Maine's finger hovered on the trigger, his whole arm shaking just enough to notice. But he held it, kept the barrel steady. John flipped over couch cushions, snatched a jewelry box from the entertainment center, grabbed a small metal lockbox from under the TV stand. Aunt came back holding a shoebox filled with loose bills and a dusty .38 snub-nosed revolver. "Nobody else here," Aunt said, breathing hard like he'd been hoping for a fight. "Let's roll," John said, already halfway out the door. Maine backed toward the exit, gun still trained on the dude lying face down in the carpet. Right before stepping out, Maine gave one last look at the man's face, at the scared, confused, helpless look in his eyes, and then he turned and ran. By the time they piled back into the BMW, C-Money had the car moving before the doors even closed. John laughed loud, slapping Maine on the back like they just finished a pickup game at the park. "Lil' man got his cherry popped today," John yelled. Maine didn't say a word. He sat back, hands still shaking, feeling both powerful and colder than he ever had before. Chapter 6, Part 3, Things Get Ugly. Summary. On the next hit, the crew breaks into an apartment where a woman and her kids are home. John gets reckless, pistol whipping the boyfriend, yelling too much. The woman screams, kids cry. Maine feels sick but keeps moving because he has to. 2 nights later, new address, new target, same crew. This time it was a brick walk-up in Mount Vernon, 1st floor, back entrance, just like the inside man said. Maine sat in the back seat again, mask pulled halfway down, staring at the floor mats while John and Aunt loaded their mags. The air inside the car felt tight. Nobody talked much, but John kept bouncing his leg, nervous energy or just being John. Maine couldn't tell anymore. C-Money stayed posted behind the wheel, engine running, eyes on the rear view like always. Before they jumped out, C gave the same quick rundown, in and out. 2 minutes max. Don't get cute, don't get loud, don't get sloppy. John smirked, already halfway out the door. They crept up the back stairs, boots soft on the metal steps. John knocked once, waited 1 heartbeat, then kicked the door open with the same reckless stomp like before. This time, it wasn't just one dude eating a sandwich. It was a family, a woman, a man, 2 kids. Maine froze in the doorway. The little boy couldn't have been older than 6, was holding a toy car, standing near the coffee table. His little sister screamed first, high and sharp like glass breaking. John didn't blink. "Everybody on the fucking floor," he roared, waving the 380 like he was conducting an orchestra of fear. The man stood up fast, hands in the air shaking. "Yo, chill, the kids, man, don't do this in front of the kids." John rushed him, no hesitation. Pistol whipped him across the temple so hard the man crumpled like wet laundry. Blood splashed onto the beige carpet in a fast, ugly pool. The woman screamed louder, grabbing the kids and curling them against the wall, sobbing into their hair, rocking back and forth like she could protect them with just her body. Maine stood there, frozen, gun loose in his grip, stomach turning over itself like bad food. Ann was already tearing through the bedroom drawers, dumping jewelry and cash into a pillowcase. John grabbed the man by the shirt, dragging him halfway across the living room, cursing under his breath, still waving the gun like he wanted a reason. C's voice rang in Maine's head. "Don't get sloppy." Maine moved on autopilot, snatched a small safe from under the coffee table, grabbed a shoebox full of rolled bills from the closet. "We good. Let's move," Maine yelled, voice cracking but loud enough to break through the noise. John hesitated for half a second, still holding the dude by the collar. Then he dropped him, spit on the floor, and bolted toward the door with Aunt right behind him. Maine was last out. He gave one last look back, at the woman still crying on the floor, at the little boy clutching his toy car tight against his chest, at the man holding his bleeding head, gasping like he couldn't catch enough air. Then Maine ran. Chapter 6, Part 4. Count up, shut up. Summary: back at the Harlem spot, they count the take from both licks. C Money laughs like it's just business. But Maine notices John acting jumpy, reckless, and unfocused. Maine tries again to bring it up to C, but C just shrugs him off. The apartment on 139th smelled like sweat, gun oil, and cheap liquor. The coffee table was covered in tangled gold chains, loose bills, and a few cracked jewelry boxes dumped from the night's take. John sat on the arm of the couch, wiping down the barrel of his .380 with the bottom of his t-shirt, leg bouncing like a bad drum beat. Aunt stood in the corner, counting out rubber-banded stacks of 20s, making little piles like he was playing Monopoly. C Money sat at the kitchen table, a glass of Hennessy in one hand, cigarette in the other, flipping through a handful of broken gold bracelets like he was shopping at a pawn shop. "Light work," C said, shaking his head with a grin. "Couple more nights like this. I'm copping that Lex off 145th I've been eyeing." John laughed, but it came out sharp and high like static. "That last nigga almost shit himself, B," he said, shaking his head fast. "Should have seen his face. Had blood leaking like a stuck pig." Maine sat near the window, hood pulled low, counting quietly through a small stack of hundreds. But his eyes kept drifting back to John. The way John's hands shook just a little when he cleaned his gun. The way he kept looking at the front door like somebody might kick it open any second. The way he laughed, too loud, too forced, like he was trying to drown something out in his head. Maine finished counting, set the stack down, and stood up. Walked over to where C sat, lowered his voice. "Yo, we gotta talk." C took a slow sip of Henny, didn't look up. "What's up, shorty?" Maine kept his tone low but direct. "John?" He wilded, moving sloppy, running his mouth, scaring people for no reason. "That last spot? There was kids in there." C exhaled smoke through his nose, set his glass down, and finally glanced up at Maine. His face stayed blank, unreadable, like always. After a pause, he shrugged. "Man's just having a bad week." Then he stood up, stretched, and walked over to grab another handful of bills from the table, like the conversation was already over. John cracked another joke from the couch. Aunt laughed. Maine stayed where he was for a long second, staring at C's back, wondering how long he was going to keep pretending like everything was still cool. Chapter 6, Part 5, Detective Heat. Summary: John gets stopped by a local detective while walking near a bodega upstate. The detective doesn't arrest him, just throws out hints and threats about knowing Harlem boys been hitting houses. John plays it cool in the moment, but when he tells C and Maine later, the tension in the crew thickens. The call came late. Maine was in Jersey, laid up at Keisha's spot, half asleep with the TV flickering on mute. His burner lit up, block number. That only meant one thing: C Money. Maine answered on the first ring. "Slide back to the block," C said, voice low, serious. Now, by the time Maine pulled up on 139th, the mood in the apartment was off. No music, no jokes. John sat at the kitchen table, hoodie still on, hands locked together like he was saying a prayer but didn't believe in God. Ant leaned against the wall, quiet for once, chewing the inside of his cheek. C Money stood near the window, smoking with the blinds half open, peeking out every few minutes like he was expecting someone. Maine closed the door behind him slow. "What happened?" he asked, eyes bouncing between all three of them. John answered first. "Got pressed by a cop," he said flat, eyes still on the floor. Maine's stomach dropped. "Where?" "Upstate. Near that corner store off Ashburton. After I grabbed a sandwich. Wasn't even moving funny, just chilling. Next thing I know, detective rolls up in an unmarked, plain clothes, big white dude, bald, mean eyes." Maine's heart started thudding. "What'd he say?" John licked his lips, finally looking up. "Said he'd been hearing stories about some Harlem boys running through houses. Mentioned our last 2 licks. Even knew we was driving a dark BMW. Maine's eyes shot to sea. C stayed still, staring out the window, blowing smoke like none of this was news. John kept going. "He didn't arrest me. Just talked. Said next time he see me in his county, he ain't asking no questions. Gave me this little speech about how Harlem dudes come upstate thinking they untouchable, then get buried up there." The room fell silent. Nobody spoke for a full minute. Ant cleared his throat but didn't say nothing. Maine finally broke the quiet. "Yo, I've been saying it. John moving too loud. Niggas been watching. Now the cops know our whip, know we from Harlem, know where we been hitting." C finally turned from the window, flicked his cigarette into the sink, but instead of arguing or yelling, he just stared at both of them, long and unreadable, then said, "Everybody lay low for a minute, no more moves. We chillin'." Then he walked to the back room, door clicking shut behind him. John sat there, chewing his bottom lip, hands tapping against the table like he couldn't sit still another second. Maine stood near the door, eyes still locked on where C disappeared, feeling that now familiar knot of distrust grow even tighter in his chest. Chapter 7, Part 1. John's Movements. Summary: Maine starts noticing John acting weirder, making short, secret phone calls, stepping away during meetings, and getting jumpy anytime sirens go off nearby. Maine's street instincts kick in hard. Harlem felt different lately. Not louder, not more dangerous, just off, like the block was holding its breath. Maine stood near the corner on 139th, leaning against a payphone, watching traffic slide by slow. His hoodie stayed pulled low over his face, but his eyes were working overtime, watching everything, especially John. John had been moving funny for the past week. Too many phone calls that ended the second someone walked in the room. Too many times stepping outside to take care of something, but coming back without anything to show for it. And the jumpiness? Yeah. That was new too. Sirens would roll by 2 blocks away and John's head would snap up like a rabbit caught in headlights. At first, Maine tried to brush it off. Told himself maybe John was just paranoid from the heat after the licks. But then came the night at the stash spot. C-Money was in the back room counting up with Ant, going over numbers. Maine sat in the living room lacing up his sneakers when he heard John's voice low, talking fast near the kitchen window. Yeah, I'll be there. Nah, I'm alone. Don't worry about him." Maine froze mid-lace. Didn't move. Didn't breathe loud. He stayed crouched low, letting John think the house was empty up front. "Nah, just make sure you pull up on time. I don't want no extra eyes on me." Then silence. John came walking out the kitchen like nothing happened, saw Maine by the door and nodded casual. "You good, little man?" John said, flashing that crooked smile like always. Maine forced a nod back, but his stomach twisted tight, and from that second on, his instincts wouldn't let it go. Something was wrong, and whatever it was, it had John written all over it. Chapter 7, Part 2, The Whisper. Summary: one of Maine's low-level runners, Tone, pulls him aside and says he saw John talking to 2 plainclothes cops near St. Nick. Maine keeps his face neutral, but inside, his blood turns ice cold. Maine was posted outside the bodega, 1 foot against the wall, eyes low but sharp. The block moved around him like always. Car horns, loud laughter, bottles clinking inside paper bags. But his mind stayed fixed on one thing, John. That phone call from the other night played on loop in his head like a bad record scratch. Maine lit a cigarette even though he barely smoked, just something to keep his hands busy. That's when Tone came jogging up, sweat on his forehead, breathing fast like he'd run the whole way from St. Nick. Yo, Maine, Tone said, glancing over his shoulder like somebody was following him. Maine flicked ash from the cigarette. Stayed cool. What's up? Tone stepped in closer, lowered his voice. Yo, I wasn't gonna say nothing at first. Thought I was bugging, but Maine didn't rush him, just stared, letting the pause drag. Tone swallowed hard. I seen John down by 142nd and St. Nick like 2 days ago, midday, right by that laundromat with the blue awning. Maine's chest tightened, but his face stayed stone cold. And Tone looked around again, dropped his voice even lower. He was talking to two dudes, plain clothes, big white guy and another dude looked like DTS. You could tell by how they stood, looking up and down the block but staying close while John talked. Maine's stomach dropped slow like a rock sinking in water. You sure? He asked, keeping his voice flat. Tone nodded fast. I'm sure, bro. I know what DTS look like. I peeped the bulges at their waists, badges on their belts under the hoodies. And John, he wasn't acting nervous or nothing, was just chopping it up like they been cool. Maine flicked his cigarette to the curb. Who else saw? Just me. I ain't tell nobody but you. Maine nodded. Good looking, he said, patting Tone on the shoulder. Tone gave him a half nod, jogged back down the block like he was late for something. Maine stood there, staring across the avenue, his pulse low but steady. Inside, though, ice cold. John, you sloppy-ass nigga. Chapter 7, Part 3, C's blind spot. Summary, Maine approaches C privately and lays out the facts about John. C gets angry, accuses Maine of being paranoid and disloyal. It's the biggest argument they've ever had, leaving Maine more isolated and angry. Maine waited until they were alone. C Money was at the brownstones, sitting on the stoop, counting through a short stack of bills with a slow, lazy rhythm like none of this street tension existed. Maine stood at the bottom of the steps, hands stuffed in his hoodie, eyes scanning the avenue before speaking. Yo, we need to talk. C didn't look up right away. We talking now, little man? Nah, for real, privately. C side-eyed him for a second, then sighed like it was some big inconvenience. He stuffed the bills in his coat and stood up. Come on, he said, walking inside toward the front hallway. Maine followed, shutting the door behind them. Inside, the air smelled like cigarette smoke and money. Maine leaned against the wall, heart beating steady but heavy. I'ma just say it straight, he started. C raised an eyebrow. Go ahead, John ain't right. C's smirk dropped halfway. Maine pushed on. I've been watching him. Phone calls, moving, funny, jumpy. Tone seen him talking to plainclothes up on St. Nick 2 days ago. 2 DTs. Said they was laughing, posted up like they wasn't even hiding it. C Money's whole body language shifted. His shoulders tense, but not like he was surprised. More like he was annoyed Maine was saying it out loud. That's a big accusation, C said flat. I ain't accusing, Maine shot back. I'm telling you what I seen. What people seen. C stepped in closer. Let me tell you something, he said, voice low and tight. John been with me since before you even knew what a pack was. Since before you had peach fuzz on your chin. That man took shots for me, ran blocks with me, did dirt with me. And now you off some hearsay from Tone. Want to come in here throwing dirt on his name? Maine's jaw clenched. This ain't dirt, this facts. C laughed once, sharp and bitter. You young niggas think you know everything 'cause you got a little money now, 'cause you pushed a few packs and copped a Benz. You forget who raised you out here, who kept you fed when your moms was out her mind. That one hit Maine harder than he wanted to admit, but he didn't fold. I'm telling you 'cause I got love for you, Maine said, voice low now but steady. You can do what you want with it, but I know what I know for a second, just a second. C Money's eyes softened, like he heard the truth buried in all the anger, but just as fast the wall went back up. Nah, I ain't trying to hear no more, C said, waving him off. You sound paranoid. You moving like you looking for enemies where there ain't none. Get your head right, Maine. Before you mess around and start making the wrong moves. C turned and walked toward the back room, shutting the door hard behind him. Maine stood there, fist balled, heart tight, feeling more alone than he ever had. Chapter 7, Part 4, Setting the Trap. Summary: after the argument with C, Maine starts keeping his gun close, tells Keisha to stay in Jersey for a while. Meanwhile, John calls C and suggests a meetup with Maine in Manhattan to clear the air. Maine senses it's a setup but agrees to show up armed and ready. Maine hadn't taken his. 380 off his waist for 2 days straight. It stayed with him, in the bathroom under the pillow, sitting on his lap while he counted money. Loaded, safety off. Every noise outside made his eyes flick toward the door. Every unknown number that called his flip, he let ring out. Keisha called twice. Left voicemails. Baby, you good? You sound different. Call me back. Maine didn't. Later that night, he finally called her, told her to stay in Jersey for a while. Said things were hot but didn't explain more. Keisha protested at first, her voice full of worry, but Maine shut it down quick. I'm serious, Keish. Stay where you at. Don't pop up. Don't call. I'll hit you when I can. Click. That was that. By the next afternoon, Maine got word from Aunt that John had been blowing up C's line all morning, talking about wanting to clear the air with Maine. Said they should link up in Manhattan, middle ground. John even picked the spot, a small parking lot off 125th and Broadway, next to an old abandoned lot that nobody really posted up at. Too quiet, too convenient. C-Money called Maine later that night, voice stiff like it hurt him to even dial. Yo, C said after a long pause, we meeting up tonight. You and me and John. Manhattan. 8 o'clock. Maine sat on the edge of his bed, staring at the floor, gun already in pieces in front of him, mid-clean. You coming solo? Maine asked, knowing full well the answer. Yeah, C lied. Maine didn't call him on it, just said, Aight, I'll be there. C hung up first. Maine stayed sitting there, picking up each piece of his gun, sliding them back together with slow, practiced hands, feeling that cold knot in his chest tighten till it almost choked him. Chapter 7, Part 5, The Last Call. Summary: C-Money phones Maine one final time that night just before the meetup. The conversation feels forced, almost like a goodbye. Maine hangs up, loads his gun, and walks out the door, fully aware of how this night might end. Maine was sitting on the floor by his bed, back against the wall, gun in his lap, staring at nothing. The TV played low in the background, one of those late-night infomercials selling cooking knives and fake jewelry. His burner buzzed on the floor next to him. C-Money. Maine let it ring twice before picking up. Yeah. C's voice came through low and flat, like he'd already been rehearsing what to say. You still good for tonight? Maine kept his tone even. I said I'd be there. Another pause, too long. Like C wanted to fill the silence but couldn't find the right words. Finally, yo, just, you know this ain't what I want, right? Maine's throat tightened, but he didn't let it show in his voice. Yeah. Another pause. I always had love for you, shorty, C said, barely above a whisper. Then, click, the line went dead. Maine sat there, phone still in his hand, staring at the wall. That weird, sharp feeling in his chest bloomed full now, like this was already written, and all he was doing was showing up to play his part. He stood up slow, slid the clip into the 380, racked one in the chamber, tucked it tight into his waistband, pulled his hoodie low, took one last long look around the room, at the mattress on the floor, the folded up now and later still sitting in the corner of the dresser drawer like old souvenirs. Then he opened the door, stepped out into the night, and walked toward Manhattan, toward whatever waited for him next. Chapter 8, Part 1, The Meetup Spot. Summary: Maine arrives at the Manhattan parking lot first, scoping the area. He notices John's car parked nearby, even though C said it would just be them. John stays leaning on the hood, grinning like this is a joke. Maine pulled into the parking lot off 125th and Broadway about 10 minutes early. The night air felt thick and greasy, humidity mixed with city grime. Streetlights flickered, throwing long, crooked shadows across the cracked pavement. Maine kept the engine running, windows halfway down, radio off. The lot was mostly empty except for a few scattered cars and an old delivery van with faded lettering parked near the back fence. But Maine's eyes locked on one car in particular, a dark green Maxima sitting 2 rows over, driver's side door cracked open, and leaning against the hood, John. Hoodie up, hands in his pockets, chewing on that same damn toothpick like he was waiting for happy hour, grinning. Like this was all funny, like this was a movie and Maine was just here to play his role. Maine's stomach twisted, but he kept his face cold. Didn't flinch, didn't blink, just sat behind the wheel for a long minute, letting the engine idle low, watching John glance at his phone, watching John check the street like he was waiting on somebody else to show up too. C said it'd just be him. That's what Maine kept replaying in his head. C said solo. But here John was, already here, already watching, already smiling like he knew how this was going to end. Maine reached down, checked the weight of the 380 under his hoodie, thumbed the safety off without looking. Then he killed the engine, took a slow, deep breath, and opened the door. Chapter 8, Part 2, Final Words. Summary: C-Money arrives, acting casual at first. They exchange small talk that quickly turns into thick tension. Maine calls out the setup vibe. John keeps making side comments, pushing Maine closer to snapping. Maine stood by his car, hands in his hoodie pockets, heart pounding but face still cold. John stayed leaning on the hood of his Maxima, chewing that damn toothpick, grinning like this was all a joke. A few minutes later, headlights swung across the lot. C-Money's BMW pulled in slow, tires crunching over gravel. The engine idled for a second before C cut it off. Door open. Out stepped C, black bubble coat. Fresh Yankees fitted, pulled low. Same gold tooth flashing as he gave Maine that old familiar head nod. You. My nigga Maine got the peach fuzz and all that now, C said, smirking as he walked over like nothing in the world was wrong. Peace, God. How you living? Maine kept his face still. I'm here, ain't I? C chuckled low. Facts. For a second, they stood there in that busted parking lot, just like old times. C gave a small laugh, looking around the lot like he was checking the air. Yo, this spot bring back memories, C said. We used to post right over there by them dumpsters back in the day. Remember that? Maine didn't answer. His eyes stayed bouncing from C to John, back to C. Thought you was coming solo, Maine said finally, voice low but sharp. C's smile twitched just for a split second, like he wasn't expecting the question that soon. John just slid through on his own, C said casual, waving it off. You know how he be, nosy as hell. John laughed from the hood of his car. What can I say? Can't miss family meetings. Maine's chest tightened. Family? Maine repeated, looking straight at John now. Since when snitches get invited to family sit-downs? John's smile froze just for a beat. Then he laughed louder, pushing off the car, hands still buried deep in his coat pockets. Oh, come on, Maine. You still on that? John said. You paranoid as fuck, shorty. I'm out here just like you, getting money, staying solid. Ain't nobody folding. Maine didn't move, didn't blink, just kept watching, feeling that slow, familiar burn crawling up his spine. C raised both hands like he was trying to keep the peace. Yo, we're not doing this tonight, C said, stepping between them. We here to clear the air. That's it. But Maine could feel it. That fake calm, that fake smile on C's face, and John's hands still deep in his pockets, like he was holding something, or getting ready to. Chapter 8, Part 3, The Argument. Summary: the tension explodes. Maine accuses John directly of working with police. John plays it off with jokes and smirks, but C's hesitation, his inability to fully defend John, pushes Maine over the emotional edge. The yelling turns into gun tension. Maine's breathing slowed, but everything else in him sped up. His heart, his instincts. That small voice screaming in the back of his head, this ain't right. He stepped in closer, voice low but slicing. Nah, fuck that clear the air shit, Maine said, eyes locked dead on John. You moving funny, son, phone calls sneaking off, talking to DTS on St. Nick broad daylight like it's sweet. John chuckled again, but this time there was no humor in it. DTS? Me? Come on, B, you serious? John stepped forward, dropping the toothpick from his mouth, letting it hit the ground between them. Maine didn't flinch. Tone saw you. I heard you on the phone. You slipping, my boy. John opened his mouth like he was about to fire back, but C-Money jumped in, raising both hands like he was breaking up a fight. Yo, enough. Y'all sound crazy out here. This ain't how we handle shit, Maine's head snapped towards C. Then how we handle it, C, huh? We just sit back and wait for him to line us up next. Let him laugh in our face while he feeding them people info. C's face tightened. That cool big brother smile faded. His eyes darkened, and for the first time in a long time, Maine saw uncertainty in him, saw hesitation. Like part of him believed Maine, but another part just couldn't, or wouldn't. Yo, Maine. C started taking one slow step forward. You ma wildin' right now, for real. You starting to see ghosts where there ain't none. Lil' man, always been. But you. Maine's jaw clenched so tight it ached. Stop trying to play me like I'm stupid, C, he said, voice breaking just a little. You think I don't peep how y'all moving? This whole setup feel funny, meeting me here. Him already posted up. Him still with you even after I told you what I seen. John took another slow step forward, hands still deep in his coat pockets. Maine, you doing too much right now, bro, John said, his voice dropping. Less jokey now. Colder. You making this bigger than it gotta be. Maine's eyes dropped to John's pockets. Saw the small twitch in John's right arm. His gut twisted tighter. Fight or flight kicked in full. Every nerve in Maine's body pulled tight like a trigger spring. Somebody was about to make a move, and Maine already knew it was going to be him or them. No in between. Chapter 8, Part 4, The Trigger Moment. Summary. John makes a sudden movement at his waist. Whether it's a gun or not, Maine doesn't wait to find out. He draws and fires twice at C-Money, neck and chest. C drops instantly. The air goes still. It happened in a blink. John's right hand twitched toward his waistband, quick, sharp, like muscle memory. Maine didn't wait, didn't think, didn't pause long enough to second guess. In one motion, he pulled the 380 from under his hoodie and brought it up chest high. C-Money's eyes went wide. Yo, wait, blah, blah. 2 shots. First caught C in the neck, spinning him sideways. Second hit dead center in his chest, dropping him where he stood. The gold tooth that had been flashing minutes before now glinted dull against the pavement as his head hit the ground with a wet final thud. Blood spread fast, dark and thick, pooling under his body, soaking into the cracks of the broken concrete. John froze. For half a second, his whole body locked up, eyes wide, mouth half open, like he couldn't believe what he just saw. Then instinct kicked in. He bolted, turned and sprinted toward his Maxima, sneakers sliding on gravel, fumbling with his keys like his life depended on it. Maine didn't chase, didn't yell, didn't move, just stood there for one slow breath, staring down at C-Money's body, chest rising once, then twice, then nothing. Sirens were far off but getting closer. Maine's legs finally woke up. He turned, ran for his car, jumped in, and peeled out a lot, tires screeching loud enough to wake half the block. Every heartbeat now felt like a gunshot inside his chest. Hands shaking on the wheel, breath coming in fast, sharp gasps like he couldn't get enough air. In the rear view, the Manhattan skyline stayed glowing like nothing had happened at all. But Maine knew better. Everything had just changed, forever. Chapter 8, Part 5, Run. Summary. Maine drives recklessly toward Jersey, heart pounding. No music, just the sound of the engine and his own breathing. He knows there's no going back. The part ends with him pulling up to Keisha's apartment, sitting in the car, hands still shaking. Maine didn't remember making half the turns, didn't remember switching lanes, didn't remember blowing through 2 red lights on Amsterdam Avenue, nearly clipping a cab on 116th. All he remembered was the sound of the engine roaring under him and the weight of the 380 still hot against his waist. His hands gripped the steering wheel so tight his knuckles turned white. No music, no radio, just the hollow wheeze of his own breath filling the car, loud and uneven like he just sprinted a mile. His mind kept flashing back. C's face when the first shot hit. That split second where C tried to speak, tried to say something, but only blood came out. Maine blinked hard, shook his head like he could erase the image. But it stayed, burned in. forever. The George Washington Bridge came and went in a blur. By the time he crossed into Jersey, his stomach twisted so tight it felt like he might throw up. Every set of headlights behind him looked like unmarked cops. Every car that stayed behind him for more than a block felt like a tail. He cut down back streets, took roads he didn't normally take, doubling back twice before finally pulling onto Keisha's block. The Benz coasted to a stop right outside her apartment building. Maine killed the engine but stayed sitting in the driver's seat, breathing, shaking, staring down at his hands like they didn't even belong to him anymore. His heart thumped hard enough to shake his ribs. For a second, just a second, he thought about driving off again, just disappearing. But his legs wouldn't move, so he sat there, in the dark, alone, knowing nothing about his life was ever going to be the same again. Chapter 9, Part 1, Back to Harlem. Summary: Maine drives back into Harlem solo. No phone calls, no warnings, just him and the gun. He catches two dudes he suspects of feeding info to John and drops both in the span of an hour. The drive back across the bridge felt colder than the ride out. Maine kept one hand on the wheel, the other resting on the handle of his. 380 sitting in the cup holder. Jersey disappeared behind him like it never existed. Harlem, that was still home. And tonight, he was coming back like a ghost with unfinished business. The streets felt tighter as he pulled off the West Side Highway. The corners he used to post up on looked smaller somehow. But the faces still moved the same, paranoid, nosy. Dudes who wouldn't look him in the eye 2 weeks ago are now staring hard like they'd heard the news about seeing Maine parked 2 blocks away from the brownstone and walked the rest on foot. Hoodie up, gun tucked. First stop, Mel. A loudmouth corner boy who spent too much time talking and not enough time making money. Maine caught him near the bodega, mid-conversation with 2 other shorties. No words. Maine stepped out the shadow, raised the 380, and dropped Mel right there with 2 shots to the chest. The crowd scattered, screams ripping through the air as sneakers slapped pavement. Maine didn't run, just kept walking. Next stop, Slick, little wannabe tough guy who'd been riding John's coattails all year. Maine found him on 140th, sitting in a parked car with the engine running, playing loud mixtape tracks like the block was sweet. Maine walked right up to the driver's side window. Slick looked up, eyes going wide, mouth halfway open like he wanted to beg. Didn't get the chance. Maine raised the gun, put one straight through the glass, caught him in the neck. The car horn stuck, blaring loud as Slick's head slumped against the steering wheel. Maine turned, walked off before anybody could even react. Sirens started howling in the distance, but Maine didn't flinch, didn't blink. 1 hour, 2 bodies, and he wasn't done yet. Chapter 9, Part 2, Plug Play. Summary: Maine sets up a fake meet with his plug, poses like he's ready to cop heavy but flips the meeting, robs him at gunpoint, and leaves with multiple bricks and serious cash. The next move wasn't personal, it was business. Maine pulled out the flip phone and scrolled to a number saved under Bossman, his direct line to the plug he'd been copying from for almost 2 years. He knew the risk, knew this would burn every bridge left in the city. But at this point, he wasn't coming back anyway. The phone rang twice. Maine, what's good? The plug's voice stayed cool like always. Maine dropped his tone, made it sound hungry but casual, trying to re-up heavy, real heavy. Got some money stashed. Need to see you today. The plug paused just long enough to make Maine's stomach tighten. Then, where at? Same spot as last time. That little warehouse lot off Bruckner. Cool. Hour. Click. Maine slid the phone shut, pulled the clip from his. 380, checked it, reloaded, tucked it tight at his waist, then grabbed the sawed-off from under the floorboard of the Benz. This wasn't going to be some slick talk robbery. This was going to be fast and ugly. An hour later, Maine pulled into the lot, parking far enough to keep space between him and the plug's car. The plug showed up alone. Old-school Chevy Caprice. Tinted windows, New York plates. Maine approached slow, hands visible, face calm like this was just another pickup. The plug rolled down the window, giving Maine that usual stone-faced look. You bring cash? Yeah, Maine nodded, tapping the pocket of his hoodie like he had a bankroll. The plug popped the trunk, then stepped out the car. Inside the trunk, 3 bricks, wrapped tight, double sealed, plus a brown paper bag sitting to the side that looked way too stuffed for just lunch money. Maine's heart thudded once, but his face didn't change. He waited till the plug turned to reach for the scale in the back seat. That's when Maine moved. Fast. Gun out. Don't turn around. Don't say a word. The plug froze mid-step. Maine stepped in close, jammed the barrel against the back of his neck. One move and you dead. Quick as hell, Maine snatched the paper bag, then grabbed the bricks from the trunk, dumping them into a duffel. The plug stood there breathing heavy, still frozen. Maine took 2 steps back, gun still raised. Count yourself lucky I ain't dropping you too, he said. Then backed away slow, hopped in the Benz, and pulled off like the devil was riding shotgun. Chapter 10, Part 1, New Air, Same Tension. Summary, Maine and Keisha arrive in Long Beach. Maine drives around for hours trying to feel out the city. The sun feels different, the streets slower. Keisha feels hopeful, but Maine stays on edge. The sun out here felt fake, too bright, too cheerful, too wide open. Maine sat low in the driver's seat of the Benz, window cracked, letting the Long Beach air hit his face while the engine idled. Palm trees lined both sides of Anaheim Street, swaying slow like they didn't have a care in the world. The people moved different, too. Walking slow, talking louder, smiling like they hadn't seen enough bad days to know better. Keisha sat in the passenger seat, legs crossed, sandals on, staring out the window like she was trying to soak it all in. Her hair was tied back under a scarf, and she wore sunglasses that barely covered the bags under her eyes from all the miles they'd just driven. "How long you gonna sit here, baby?" she asked soft, looking over at him. Maine kept both hands on the wheel, scanning the street like he was back in Harlem on lookout. "Just peeping." "Peeping what? Ain't nobody even outside." "That's the part that bothered me." Keisha laughed low, shaking her head. "You in Cali now, baby. This ain't New York. People ain't on the corner all day. It's different out here." Maine didn't answer right away. His eyes tracked 2 kids riding bikes down the block, then lingered on a dude walking with a pit bull, throwing glances at every parked car like he was casing them. Different, but still the same. Every city got wolves. Some just smiled more while they hunted. Maine finally cut the engine and stepped out. The California heat wrapped around him like a heavy blanket. Too dry, too still. Keisha climbed out too, stretching her arms overhead, letting the sun hit her bare shoulders. "We need a place to sleep," she said, glancing around. "I'm tired of riding. My back hurt like hell." Maine nodded. "I'ma find something." She smiled, small but real. "Good. And tomorrow, I'm finding me a job. I ain't about to sit up broke, waiting on you to figure life out." Maine almost smiled at that. Almost. He pulled the duffel from the back seat, the same one that still held what was left of the stolen work from New York. Zipped it halfway open just to check. Still there, still waiting to make him money, or get him killed. Either way, he had business to handle. And this city was about to find out what a Harlem kid really moved like. Chapter 10, Part 2, Big Tone's Quick Flip. Summary, Maine meets Big Tone, a local crip, in a liquor store parking lot. Sells off the rest of his leftover work from New York dirt cheap just to get liquid cash. Big Tone gives him his first lesson on Cali street politics. The liquor store sat on the corner of Atlantic and Burnett. Sun-faded signs plastered across the windows. EBT accepted, cold beer, Western Union. Maine parked the Benz 2 rows back, engine running, one eye on the front door, the other on his mirrors. Keisha stayed at the motel for this one. Maine popped the trunk, grabbed a small shoebox with the last of the leftover bricks he'd boosted from the plug in New York. It wasn't much, but it was enough to get something moving. The intro came through a dude named Lil Nate, a motel neighbor Maine met 2 nights earlier while buying cigarettes. Nate told him about Big Tone, said he moved weight for the East Side Crips and didn't mind doing business with out-of-towners, if the price was right. Maine stood near the ice machine, shoebox in hand, waiting. 10 minutes later, Big Tone pulled up in a 2-tone Cutlass Supreme, chrome rims shining like he just got them buffed that morning. Big dude. 6'3" easy. Beard thick, Wore a blue Dodgers fitted low over his face, tattoos creeping from under both sleeves. He climbed out the Cutlass slow, sizing Maine up with lazy eyes but sharp attention. "You New York?" Tone asked, walking over, wiping sweat from his brow with a rag. Maine kept it simple. "Yeah, Harlem?" Maine nodded. Big Tone smirked, laughed low. "I knew it. Y'all Harlem niggas always move like the world owe y'all something." Maine didn't bite. Just lifted the shoebox lid a crack, enough for Tone to see the work inside. Tone's eyes lit for half a second. "Then how much you want for it?" Maine threw out a number, lower than it should have been. Tone laughed again. "Damn, you giving this shit away." "Just need to flip and breathe," Maine said. Tone nodded, pulled a fat wad from his shorts, counted off bills with thick fingers like he'd done it 1,000 times. Maine took the cash, tucked it inside his hoodie pocket without recounting. Trust was dead, but desperation had no manners. Before leaving, Tone leaned in just a little, voice dropping lower. "Word of advice, homie. This Cali shit ain't like back home. You don't just post up on a corner and think it's sweet. Out here, it sets first, money second." Maine kept his face still. "I hear you." Tone slapped him on the shoulder like they were old friends. "I'ma spread your name around. Be ready when people come asking who you is." Maine gave a short nod, walked back to the Benz, and pulled off. As he hit the light at 10th Street, he felt it. For the first time since he touched down, he wasn't just passing through anymore. Now, he was officially on the radar. Chapter 11, Part 1, First Body on the Coast. Summary: Maine catches his first body in Long Beach. Self-defense but messy. Keisha's begging him to chill, saying this ain't Harlem. Maine stays cold, tells her it's too late to turn back now. It was supposed to be a quick pickup, 2 ounces. Some small money play just to keep the cash flowing, while Maine waited for Lido to green-light the bigger front. Maine pulled up behind the liquor store on Cherry Ave wearing a black hoodie and khaki cargos, gun tucked like always. The sun had just dropped behind the rooftops, leaving that purple-gray glow in the sky that always made the streets feel more dangerous than they already were. The dude was late, 20 minutes late. Maine stayed posted, back against the wall, eyes scanning both ends of the alley. When the dude finally showed, pulling up on a beat-up beach cruiser, Maine already knew something was off. Too much looking over his shoulder, too much fumbling in his backpack. By the time the dude hopped off the bike, Maine had already slid his hand inside his hoodie, fingers wrapping around the handle of the 380. "Yo, you got it?" Maine asked, keeping his tone flat but watching every move. Yeah, I got you, homie," the dude said, but his eyes kept bouncing. Maine stepped closer. "Let me see it." That's when the dude made his mistake, reached too fast for something deep inside the backpack. Maine didn't wait to find out if it was a scale, a bag of work, or a gun. Blah, blah, 2 shots to the chest. The dude dropped on the spot, slumping sideways over the bike, legs twitching like puppet strings being cut. Maine stood there for a second, breathing hard, heart thudding, looking down at the body. His stomach stayed cold, not regret, just calculation. Who heard that? Where the nearest cameras? Where was his exit? He tucked the burner back under his hoodie and walked off fast, hopping back in the Benz like it was just another Tuesday. Back at the apartment, Keisha knew something was wrong before he even opened his mouth. She stood in the kitchen, hands shaking as she wiped down the counter with the same rag over and over. "What happened?" she asked, not looking at him. Maine sat on the edge of the bed, peeling off his hoodie slow, breathing shallow. "Handled something." Keisha froze, rag falling from her hand. "Don't tell me you caught a body out here." Maine didn't answer. That silence said it all. Her hands flew to her face. "Maine, you promised me. This ain't Harlem. We supposed to be starting over. Please, don't bring that here." Maine stood, crossed the room in 3 steps, grabbed her gently by the face, forcing her to look at him. "Listen to me," he said, voice low but hard. "We ain't got the luxury of pretending we brand new. This the life now. Ain't no turning back." Keisha's eyes filled with tears, but she nodded slow, because deep down, she already knew. Maine wasn't built to run forever, and Long Beach just became another hunting ground. Chapter 11, Part 2, Big Weight from Lido. Summary: Lito, impressed by Maine's grind, discipline, and how low-key he moves, starts fronting him bigger loads, 5 to 10 keys at a time. The money flow doubles. Maine's focus sharpens. Lito admires his East Coast flavor and how calculated he is. The sun hung high over Long Beach Boulevard, turning the pavement into waves of heat. Maine stood in the back of Lito's auto body shop, the smell of motor oil and paint thinner heavy in the air. Cars in various stages of repair sat around the lot, hoods up, tires off, some covered with tarps. But everyone who knew this wasn't just a mechanic spot. It was Lito's front. And today business was being discussed in the office behind the lift bays. Lito sat behind a desk cluttered with invoices and car keys, gold chain resting heavy on his chest, tattoos peeking out from under his white tank top. Maine sat across from him, elbows on his knees, eyes steady, voice low. Lito lit a cigarette, took one long pull, then blew smoke toward the ceiling. "You got a quiet way about you, homie," Lito said, smirking. "I like that. Most of these young dudes out here talk too much, move too messy. You remind me of my older cousins back in Tijuana, all business, all chess." Maine gave a small nod but didn't smile. Lito leaned forward. "You ready for more?" "How much more?" Maine asked, voice even. Lito laughed low. "How's 10 keys sound?" Maine didn't blink, didn't show even a flicker of hesitation. "Sounds good?" Lito grinned wider now, tapping ash into a nearby soda can. "I like you, New York. Real hungry, real focused. Ain't out here chasing bitches or loud cars. You about your paper." "That's rare." Maine stayed quiet, but inside, his mind was already calculating. 10 keys meant more hands, more corners, more risk, but it also meant more distance from broke, more distance from fear. Lito stood up, grabbed a clipboard off the desk, handed it over. "Here's the number, same warehouse. Bring me my money in 2 weeks. You late, you know how this goes." Maine stood, shook Lito's hand firm. "I'll be on time." As Maine walked out the shop, sliding the clipboard under his arm, he felt it settle in his chest. This was no corner boy operation anymore. This was big leagues. And now, his name was floating heavier than ever on both sides of the city. Chapter 11, Part 3. Welcome to Oakland. Summary: Maine takes Keisha up to Oakland to be with her family. Her cousins start moving work for Maine in the town. Maine sets up his back-and-forth route between the Bay and L.A., making real money now. The drive north on the 5 freeway took almost 6 hours, but to Maine it felt like half that. One hand on the steering wheel of his brand-new Lexus coupe, the other resting on his lap, mind racing with numbers and routes and next moves. Keisha sat passenger side, window cracked, letting the cold Bay Area breeze roll through her braids. For the first time in weeks, she smiled like she meant it. Every mile closer to Oakland, her mood lightened, her voice got softer, her breathing deeper, like being near her people gave her air she hadn't tasted since Harlem. Lake Merritt looked like a postcard. Calm water, joggers, older dudes playing chess near the benches. Maine pulled up to a small one-bedroom off Grand Avenue, overlooking the lake just enough to catch the sunset if you stood near the window. Keisha walked through the apartment with her shoes off, spinning slow, laughing to herself. "I love it," she said, dropping onto the futon like it was a throne. Maine stood near the window, arms crossed, watching the street below. "Stay close for the next few days," he said, still scanning. Keisha nodded, but her eyes stayed glowing. "I'm home now." Her cousins showed up that weekend, Marcus, Dre, and Trell, all three fresh out of high school but already knee-deep in Oakland street politics. Maine peeped the way they carried themselves, hungry but green, quick tempers but loyal. They respected Maine instantly. His accent, his energy, the way he didn't talk too much, but when he did, every word meant something. After one sit down in the apartment, with blunt smoke hanging thick in the air and the front door locked tight, Maine laid out a small plan. 3 keys, one for each cousin to move across different parts of East Oakland in the 20s. Cash up front, no credit, no excuses. They jumped at the opportunity. By late 1991, Maine was running weight back and forth between LA and the Bay, making drops, picking up cash, stacking faster than he ever did back in Harlem. The Lexus coupe, fresh off the lot, glided up and down the freeway like it belonged there. Every stop in L.A., Lito handed him bigger loads with less questions. Every stop back in Oakland, Keisha greeted him at the door with dinner and a smile. Sometimes, Maine caught himself thinking, maybe this could really work. Or maybe he could finally build something that lasted. But deep down, he knew better. Too much history, too many bodies behind him, and now too many eyes starting to notice him out here too. Chapter 11, Part 4, Harlem flies in and fucks up. Summary, Maine invites a couple Harlem homies to Oakland for a weekend. One of them gets too drunk and loud at a dice game, dropping Maine's name all over. Word spreads fast, and trouble starts brewing. The idea seemed harmless at first, a little piece of home, some familiar faces, a break from the California politics and the constant low hum of paranoia. So Maine flew in two of his day one homies from Harlem, Boogie and Lil Rick. They landed at Oakland Airport, both stepping off the plane wearing 8-ball jackets loud as hell, talking like they were still on Lenox Ave. Keisha wasn't feeling it from jump. They too loud, she said, watching them clown in the parking lot while Maine packed their bags into the Lexus. Maine smirked but shrugged it off. They family. The first night went smooth. Drinks, dominoes. Keisha cooked. Boogie kept calling Keisha wifey, and Lil Rick kept asking when they was going to hit Eastmont Mall to see some Oakland girls. Maine laughed, let them have their fun. But by the second night, everything went left. The dice game started on MacArthur, outside a liquor store near 84th Ave. Boogie had been drinking Hennessy straight from the bottle, loud talking every roll, throwing money like he had a point to prove. Oakland dudes circled the game, some cool, some watching with quiet suspicion. It wasn't just the money Boogie was flashing. It was the mouth. Yo, y'all Cali niggas can't shoot worth shit, Boogie yelled, laughing loud, stacking another pile of 20s. Harlem all day, baby. Big Maine got us out here eating. Maine, standing on the edge of the crowd, froze the second he heard his name. Heads turned. Eyes started cutting toward him. The air shifted. Two dudes standing near the corner, both wearing red, locked eyes with Maine for half a beat too long before dipping into a parked car and pulling off slow. Maine grabbed Boogie by the back of his jacket, yanked him off the sidewalk mid-roll. Yo, you buggin', Maine hissed, dragging him toward the car. Boogie, still half drunk, laughed it off. Chill, bro, we good. They love us out here. Maine didn't answer, didn't explain. Just shoved him in the back seat, jumped in the driver's seat, and peeled off. By the time they made it back to the apartment near Lake Merritt, Maine already knew. The word was out. His name was in too many mouths now. And Harlem Beef had just arrived in Oakland. Chapter 11, Part 5. Hitters come looking. Summary, Harlem hitters show up in Oakland, throwing money around, asking for Maine. Keisha's cousins and their Oakland crew step up heavy, ready for war. Maine flies back from L.A. just in time, locking everything down. It didn't take long. 2 days after the dice game, word started bouncing off every corner in East Oakland. Some New York niggas out here asking questions. They flashing money, talking reckless, looking for somebody named Maine. They offering paper just for his address. Keisha's cousins, Marcus, Dre, and Trell, caught wind first. Then Big Tone from Long Beach hit Maine's pager, leaving a short but urgent message. Yo, Harlem Wolves landed in the town. Careful. Maine was sitting in Lito's office down in L.A. when he got the call from Keisha. Her voice cracked halfway through her first sentence. They out here, Maine, some dudes from back home. They've been pulling up on barbershops, liquor stores, asking about you, throwing cash around like they celebrities or something. Maine didn't waste a breath. I'm on my way. By the time Maine touched back down in Oakland that night, the vibe had shifted. Lake Merritt didn't feel calm anymore. It felt like Harlem with palm trees. Maine parked 2 blocks from the apartment, walked the rest on foot, hoodie up, burner tucked tight under his windbreaker. When he got upstairs, Keisha's cousins were already there, sitting around the living room, faces hard, eyes restless. Shotguns leaned against the wall. Pistols sat on couch cushions like throw pillows. Marcus stood up first. Yo, we ready, he said. Ain't nobody gonna touch you, fam. Maine looked around the room at all of them, young, reckless, loyal. Somewhere deep in his chest, that cold knot started to loosen. Not all the way, but enough. Maine grabbed a chair, flipped it backward, sat down slow, rolled up his sleeves. "All right," he said, voice low but steady. "Let's make sure they know they came to the wrong coast." The room stayed quiet for a second. Then everybody nodded. And the next phase of Maine's war officially began. Chapter 12, Part 1, Trail Folds. Summary: Feds press Trell after a raid in Oakland. Under pressure, scared, and thinking about his family, Trell gives up Maine's last location. The news hits the block fast. It started with a knock at 3 a.m., real quiet, real calm. But Trell knew before he even opened the door that something was wrong. He peeked through the blinds. Unmarked cars parked crooked on the curb, two big white dudes in windbreakers standing on the porch, hands tucked near their waists like they were waiting for an excuse. By the time Trell turned to run for the back door, the battering ram came through the front. Wood splintered. His girl screamed. His kids started crying from the bedroom. By the time he hit the kitchen, 3 more agents came pouring in through the side, pinning him to the floor before he could even curse. Cuffs tight, face scraped against the tile. The first voice in his ear came from a detective with coffee breath and a thick Oakland accent. "We ain't here for you, Trell. We here for the big fish, and you gonna help us catch him." By mid-morning, Trell sat in a freezing interrogation room, hoodie still damp from the rain outside, hands shaking as 2 feds sat across from him, flipping through a folder thick with photos and paperwork. Maine's face popped up more than once. Photos from surveillance, phone records, a blurry shot of Maine pumping gas at a Chevron off the 5 freeway. The agent leaned in close, voice syrupy but sharp underneath. "You got kids, Trell, cute ones. Be a real shame if Daddy caught a 20-year bid over somebody else's dirt." Trell bit down on his bottom lip so hard it split. They slid a pen and paper toward him. "All we need is a location for the next 3 minutes. Trell sat there staring at the floor, thinking about his kids, thinking about his girl crying back at the house, thinking about Maine, and then he started talking. By the time word hit the street that afternoon, Maine was already gone. Gone before the black vans could pull up. Gone before the feds could swarm the motel off East 14th. Gone, but now officially a ghost, with nowhere left to hide in Oakland. Chapter 12, Part 2, L.A. Ain't Safe. Summary: Maine skips back to L.A., but when he arrives, Lito's whole operation is under siege. Lito, paranoid and angry, starts believing Maine's the one who snitched. Maine barely survives 2 close calls before realizing L.A. is burned too. Maine's heart stayed ice cold the whole ride down the 5 freeway. The Lexus moved like it was floating, eating miles, engine humming steady under his hands. Every time he checked the rear view, he expected flashing lights, unmarked cars, black vans, something, but nothing came, for now. He didn't call Keisha, didn't call nobody, or just drove back to L.A., back to Lito. But the second he touched down in South Central, he knew something was off. His usual motel, taped off. 2 black and whites parked out front, yellow tape flapping in the breeze. The corner store where Lito's runners used to hang out, empty. And the auto shop, dead silent, gates rolled down, doors padlocked. Not even the sound of a rat moving through the lot. Maine parked 2 blocks away and crept toward the side alley, staying low, scanning both directions like second nature. That's when he saw him, Spider, one of Lito's younger hitters, leaning against the wall near the dumpsters, face pale like he'd seen a ghost. Maine grabbed him by the collar, yanking him back behind a fence. "Where's Lito?" Maine hissed. Spider flinched hard like he thought Maine was the police. "Gone, bro. Feds swept him yesterday. Warehouse, shop, his crib in Bell Gardens. All hit back to back." Maine's chest tightened. "And now?" Spider shook his head fast. "Nobody know. Word is Lito thinks somebody tipped him. Think it was you. Swear to God he told people to clip you on sight if you come back around." Maine froze. That cold, ugly truth hit him square. Now he had a target on his back in L.A. too. Before Spider could say another word, a dark blue Chevy slowed at the corner. 2 dudes in the front seat, both with hats pulled low, both looking too long in Maine's direction. Without thinking, Maine pushed off the wall and sprinted for his car. Bullets cracked behind him. 2 loud pops, then glass shattering near the corner store sign. Maine dove behind a parked van, yanked his burner from his waist, and let off 3 quick shots toward the Chevy's back window. Glass exploded, tires screeched. The car peeled off down the block. Maine didn't wait. He jumped in the Lexus, mashed the gas, and burned rubber back toward the freeway. Breathing hard, mind racing, heart pounding like war drums. 2 cities now, 2 war zones, and nowhere safe to land. Chapter 12, Part 3, Slide to Detroit. Summary: Maine packs up whatever cash he has left, grabs fake papers, and skips town. Detroit becomes his next hiding spot. Low-key moves, small-time wait, just enough to eat. Ashley flies in from Philly to be by his side. Maine didn't pack much, just the cash. Stacks on stacks, some still in Harlem rubber bands, some in brown paper bags from L.A., a few burner phones, 2 loaded pistols, and a fake New Jersey ID he'd bought months back from a dude in Southgate. Cheap hologram, wrong birth date, wrong eye color, but it'd have to do. Before the sun came up, he was back on the freeway, heading east. Detroit, cold weather, cheap rent, less eyes, and most important, no memories. By the time he touched down, it was late January. Snow on the ground, slush in the streets, and a whole different kind of hustle waiting for him. Maine rented a small 2-bedroom on the west side off Fink Hill, paid 3 months cash up front just to avoid questions. He stayed low, no flashy cars, no loud jewelry, just nickel and dime work. Zah small packs moved hand to hand through a couple local dudes he met at a gas station off Grand River. Enough to eat, enough to pay rent, but never enough to leave a trail. Keisha stayed in Oakland. They talked once by payphone. Her voice sounded tired, worn out. They're done. I can't keep doing this, Maine, she said soft. I love you, but I'm tired of packing bags and running. I need peace. Maine didn't argue, didn't beg. Just said, I get it, and hung up. A week later, Ashley flew in from Philly, no warning, no questions. Just showed up, hopped out a Greyhound with 1 small suitcase and her same wild Philly accent. Where you at, nigga? She texted from a payphone. When Maine picked her up, she didn't ask about Keisha, didn't ask why Detroit, just smiled, hugged him tight, and said, you already know I'm riding. For a while, things felt bearable, small money, small moves, but no gunshots, no raids, no Harlem faces popping up where they didn't belong. Maine stayed low, kept his circle tighter than ever, thought, just maybe, he could breathe again. But the streets don't forget, and karma don't sleep. Chapter 12, Part 4, Shot at the Club. Summary: random night, random beef. Maine gets hit twice, chest and shoulder, inside a packed Detroit club. Wasn't even his beef. Wrong place, wrong time. Everything changes in seconds. It was supposed to be a chill night, just music, drinks, some space to breathe. Maine hadn't been out in weeks. Ashley kept pushing him. Come on. It's just one night. You've been in this apartment too long. Ain't nobody looking for you out here. Let's live for once. Maine finally caved. So they pulled up to a spot on 7 Mile, a small club called Club Envy. Dark walls, sticky floors. DJ playing East Coast versus West Coast sets all night. Maine kept to the back, hoodie up, Hennessy in hand, watching the door like second nature. Ashley danced in front of him, laughing, hair swinging. For a minute, it almost felt normal. The fight broke out near the bar. 2 local dudes arguing over a chain. Voices got louder. Crowds started shifting. Bottles flew. Next thing Maine knew, somebody let off. Pop, pop, pop. Maine's first instinct was to grab Ashley, shove her to the floor behind him. But the second he turned, blam. 1 shot caught him high in the chest, near the collarbone. Another ripped through his shoulder, spinning him halfway around. He hit the floor hard, gasping, air stuck in his throat, ears ringing like a bomb had gone off next to his head. People screamed. Feet stampeded past him, stepping over his legs, knocking into his side. Ashley's voice broke through the noise, shaky but close. Somebody help. Somebody call 911. Please, please. Maine blinked slow, vision blurry, ceiling lights spinning above him like sirens. Blood pooled warm under his back. His breath came in short, wet gasps. His hands fumbled toward his waist, reaching for the burner. But it was too late. Darkness swallowed him whole. Chapter 12, Part 5, Wake-Up Call. Summary. Maine wakes up in the hospital, disoriented and weak. Ashley is crying by his side, holding his hand, mumbling about how young he is. After the hospital staff ran his ID and fingerprints, they learned the truth. Maine is only 19. The feds arrive at his room. No more running. The first thing Maine felt was pain, deep, throbbing, burning pain in his chest, in his shoulder, like somebody lit matches under his skin and left them there. The second thing he noticed was the beeping. Loud, slow, rhythmic, some machine counting every breath he took, like it was keeping score. His eyelids fluttered open, heavy like bricks. The ceiling above him was white, covered in small perforated tiles. Smelled like bleach and old plastic. Hospital. He tried to move, tried to sit up, but the wires in his arm pulled tight. A soft hand touched his face. "Ashley," he croaked, voice barely there. She leaned in close, face puffy, eyes red like she'd been crying for hours. Her hands trembled as she stroked the side of his cheek. "You scared the hell out of me," she whispered, trying to smile but failing. He blinked at her, trying to piece together what happened. Last thing he remembered was the club, the gunshots, the floor, blood. His head turned slightly, eyes catching a glimpse of a chart at the foot of the bed. On it, printed in bold letters, Jermaine Carter, male, 19 years old, gunshot trauma, critical. His heart skipped. 19. Ashley caught the flicker in his eyes and nodded before he could speak. "They know," she said quietly. "The nurses, the doctors, after they ran your ID and your fingerprints." Her voice cracked. "I didn't know, Maine. I thought you was 23 this whole time. You a kid. A kid out here doing all this crazy shit before he could answer. Before he could even lift his head." The door swung open hard. 2 men in plainclothes stepped in, badges out, guns holstered but hands close. One of them, short, stocky guy with a goatee, walked straight to the side of the bed, flashing a grim smile like he'd been chasing this moment for months. "Jermaine Carter," man said, pulling out a folded paper. "U.S. Marshals, you're under arrest. We got questions. And trust me, you're going to answer every single one of them." Ashley gasped, covering her mouth. Maine, still half drugged, still bleeding under the bandages, just laid there, staring at the ceiling, feeling the full weight of everything. Finally, catch up to him. Chapter 13, Part 1, Hospital Games. Summary. The feds grill Maine day and night while he's still weak in the hospital. They dangle small offers, threaten him, play psychological games. Maine keeps his mouth shut. The hospital ceiling never changed. Same cracked tiles, same humming fluorescent lights, same slow beep, reminding Maine with every pulse that he was alive, but barely. The pain meds kept him floating somewhere between sleep and full consciousness, but every few hours, they came back. The feds. 2 agents in plain clothes, same ones from that first night. One short and stocky with the goatee, the other tall with wire-rimmed glasses and a smug smile like he already knew how this story ended. They didn't yell, didn't threaten loud. They were patient, calculated, rotating between good cop, bad cop, all while Maine lay there with IV tubes in his arms and stitches burning under his bandages. "You're a smart kid, Jermaine," Goatee said during the first visit. "Too smart for all this. You know what's coming, right?" Maine didn't answer, didn't blink, just stared at the ceiling like he was watching clouds pass by. Wire glasses leaned in closer. "We're talking life, murder, trafficking, interstate flight, federal enhancements. You're barely 19, kid. You ain't built for Rikers. You ain't built for federal court. You ain't built for what's coming next." Maine kept his breathing steady, didn't flinch, didn't break. Goatee smirked, shook his head like it was all a game he already won. "Look, give us something, John, Lito, anybody, hell, even that chick Keisha if you want. Help yourself out, kid." Maine finally turned his head, slow and deliberate, locking eyes with him. And with a dry, cracked voice, all he said was, "Get the fuck out my room." The next day, they came back, this time with papers, photos. C-Money's crime scene, surveillance shots from Oakland, phone records from L.A., witness statements from Harlem dudes Maine used to break bread with, now flipping to save themselves. They laid it all on the tray table next to his bed like room service. Maine stared at it, silent, numb, but still wouldn't talk. Ashley stayed by his side through most of it, brought him bottled water, sat next to him for hours just holding his hand, her eyes rimmed red from crying too much. Sometimes she whispered to him when she thought he was asleep, "Just hold on. You're gonna get through this. Please just hold on." But Maine knew the truth. This wasn't going to be no quick nightmare he woke up from. This was the beginning of something even darker than he'd ever imagined. Chapter 13, Part 2, Back to New York. Summary: Maine gets transported back to NYC, shackled on a federal flight. As the plane flies over the skyline, memories from Harlem start flooding back hard. Reality sets in. This is real. This is happening. The cuffs felt heavier than the last time, thicker, tighter, cold metal biting into his wrists like punishment. Maine sat near the back of the federal transport plane, shackled at the ankles, wrists chained to his waist, 2 U.S. Marshals sitting across the aisle, both staring at him like he was already a ghost. The plane hummed low as it cut through the clouds, the windows small and grimy. Maine kept his head down, eyes focused on the floor, but every few minutes he drifted, back to Harlem, back to 139th Street, the brownstone, the dice games, late nights with C-Money sitting in that BMW giving him game, back to being a kid with $20 in his sock and dreams too big for his block. And now, 19 years old, 2 bodies tied to his name, a Fed case stretched across 3 states, and a line of people, some alive, some dead, who'd all helped walk him to this moment. The plane started descending, the clouds parted, and there it was, the New York City skyline, dark, crowded, loud, even from the sky. For a second, Maine just stared, felt that burn deep in his chest, equal parts hate and homesickness. When they landed at LaGuardia, the marshals didn't say a word, just yanked him up by the chain and marched him through the back entrance like contraband. No family, no Ashley, no Keisha, just cold air and a city that had been waiting on his downfall. By the time they loaded him into the transport van, heading toward the tombs, Maine knew this wasn't no county jail stay. This was different. Big time, real time. And it was just beginning. Chapter 13, Part 3, First Court Date. Summary: Maine stands in front of a Manhattan judge for the first time. The prosecutor reads off his charges one by one. Maine keeps his face stone cold, but inside, it's hitting hard just how deep he's in. The holding cell inside Manhattan criminal court smelled like piss and old metal, paint peeling from the walls, concrete floor cold enough to freeze through his county-issued sneakers. Maine sat on the bench, hands cuffed at his waist again, head down, heart steady but heavy. Around him, other dudes paced like caged animals, some talking to themselves, some me-mugging everybody, some staring off like their souls had already left. Maine stayed still, quiet, breathing slow, thinking. When the door buzzed, 2 COs came for him. "Carter." Maine stood, letting them clip the short chain between his ankle cuffs. They walked him down a narrow hallway smelling like bleach and sweat, up 2 flights, then into the courtroom. The room was packed tighter than he expected. Public seating filled with reporters, court clerks, and a few faces he recognized but hadn't seen in years. Old Harlem dudes, some who used to dap him up on the block, now sitting close to the prosecutor's table, wearing fresh clothes and clean sneakers, looking way too comfortable on that side of the room. Maine caught Tone in the back row, head down, avoiding eye contact like it physically hurt him to be there. Snake. The judge, a short, tired-looking white man with reading glasses perched at the end of his nose, flipped through the paperwork with slow, exaggerated boredom. The prosecutor stood, smoothed her skirt, and started reading. On the charges of murder in the 2nd degree, narcotics trafficking, possession with intent to distribute, conspiracy, interstate flight, and illegal firearm possession. She paused, letting the words hang heavy in the air like smoke. Maine didn't blink, didn't flinch, face cold, heart colder. But deep in his chest, that sinking feeling set in for real this time. This wasn't street beef, wasn't block politics. This was the state of New York versus Jermaine Carter. and they wanted him forever. The judge asked if he had legal representation. Maine's public defender stood, barely able to make eye contact with him. "We're requesting more time to review discovery, Your Honor." The judge set the next date, 2 weeks out. Maine barely heard the words. His ears started ringing again like back in the club, like gunshots on loop. Only this time, there was no ducking, no running, just the slow grinding wheels of the system swallowing him whole. Chapter 13, Part 4, Riker's Reality Check. Summary: Maine gets processed into Riker's Island. The sounds, the smells, the tension, new rules now. He starts clocking who's still loyal and who already flipped. He gets tested quick. The bus ride to Rikers felt like slow death. Steel cages inside the transport van. Windows tinted so dark Maine couldn't see nothing but his own reflection staring back. Wrists cuffed, ankles chained. The van smelled like sweat, spit, and fear. 2 other dudes sat across from him, both quiet, both looking like they already knew what was waiting for them on the island. Maine sat with his back pressed against the wall, eyes low, stomach tight. By the time the van pulled up to the entrance gate and the COS started yelling, that old familiar Harlem instinct kicked back in. Stay alert, stay cold, don't trust nobody. Intake was worse than he remembered from juvenile. Strip search, fingerprinting again, photographed like he was a damn tourist attraction. Then came the orange jumpsuit, 2 sizes too big, pockets shallow, shoes with no laces, and then the noise. Rikers didn't sleep, didn't pause, didn't breathe. It screamed, cursed, laughed loud from dark corners. Metal clanged from tier to tier like war drums. Somebody getting jumped 3 cells down. Another dude screaming for medical 2 tiers up. 'Cause walking past like none of it existed. Maine walked into his assigned dorm with 2 COs trailing close behind. Faces turned as soon as he entered. Old heads, young wolves. Some with blank stares, others with smiles too wide to be friendly. A couple dudes whispered his name before he even made it past the day room. Yo, that's him, that's Maine, from Harlem. Word had traveled. Fast. That first night he stayed on the top bunk near the back wall, back against the steel, 1 foot braced against the frame like he was sleeping in an alley. Didn't eat, didn't sleep, didn't speak, just watched, clocking faces, noticing 2 Harlem dudes from his past who now barely made eye contact, the same ones who used to dap him up heavy on the block. Now sitting close to the dudes who played the yard was Keo's, snitch energy, too friendly with correction. Maine filed it all away in his head, list getting longer by the hour. By morning, Maine already knew Rikers was just another block, bigger, meaner, but still just another block. And survival, that part never changed. Chapter 14, Part 1, OG Blessing. Summary: an old Harlem UGG slides Maine a shank warning him to stay ready. Maine knows that once you get handed steel inside, life shifts. The noise in C-74 housing never stopped. Doors slamming, cuss yelling, radios crackling, fights breaking out on random tiers, and the whispers. Those traveled faster than anything. Maine sat on the edge of his bunk, elbows on his knees, staring at the floor like it had answers. His stomach stayed tight, like it had been since the day he touched down. He felt eyes on him constantly. Dudes watching his walk, watching who he spoke to, watching if he ever smiled, and most of all, watching if he was scared. Late that night, after lights out, somebody walked past his cell slow. Maine barely lifted his head at first, but then, out the corner of his eye, he saw something small and dark slide across the floor near his foot, wrapped in a sock. No words, no announcement, just a low voice through the bars. Keep that close, be ready for whatever, ain't nobody gonna save you but you. Maine's eyes flicked toward the tier, and there he was, Pop Lou, an old head from Harlem. Used to run numbers on Lennox back in the 70s. Maine barely knew him outside of random nods on the block, but everybody knew Pop Lou had done 2 state bids already, and survived both. Maine waited until the tier cleared, then slowly unwrapped the sock. Inside, a short, sharpened piece of metal, homemade, jagged on one side. Blunt handle wrapped tight with old t-shirt fabric for grip, a shank, ugly but effective. Maine turned it over in his hands, felt the cold weight of it. And in that moment, something shifted inside him. He wasn't just waiting to get jumped no more, wasn't walking slow through hallways with his head down. Now, he had steel. And when you got steel in Rikers, that meant one thing. You were officially in the war now. Chapter 14, Part 2, Lawyer Moves. Summary: Maine's public defender pushes hard in court presenting Maine's juvenile history, trauma, and upbringing. The judge starts showing subtle signs he might lean light on sentencing. The courtroom felt colder than usual. Maine sat at the defense table wearing the same tan Department of Corrections jumpsuit he'd had on all week, ankles chained under the table, hands cuffed at the waist. His lawyer, Miss Latham, mid-40s, tired eyes but sharp as a razor when she needed to be, stood tall beside him, shuffling papers with quick, nervous energy. The assistant DA sat across from them, smug, flipping through a yellow legal pad like this was already a done deal. But today, Miss Latham came swinging. She stood, cleared her throat, and addressed the judge with more force than usual. Your Honor, before this court gets lost in headlines and public opinion, I want to remind everyone sitting here that Mr. Carter, Jermaine Carter, is 19 years old. And at the time of the majority of these charges, he was still legally a juvenile. The judge peered over his glasses, expression unreadable, but he didn't cut her off. So she kept going. She laid it all out. Maine's mother strung out, and raised with no parental supervision, and homeless at 13, and running errands for drug dealers just to eat. No schooling past 8th grade. Constant exposure to violence and trauma from birth. Your Honor, he never stood a chance, she said, voice lowering for effect. And while the charges here are serious, we are asking the court to take context into consideration before making any long-term decisions about Mr. Carter's future. Maine sat there stone-faced, but deep down, something cracked loose. Hearing it all laid out like that, like his whole life summarized into bullet points of trauma and bad luck, it felt strange, like he was watching somebody else's story. The judge stayed quiet for a long moment, then finally, with a slow nod, duly noted, Miss Latham. I'll review your motion before we proceed with any further scheduling on sentencing recommendations. When court recessed, Miss Latham leaned close to Maine, her voice low and urgent. They're still coming at you hard, but I see some wiggle in them. Keep your mouth shut. Stay patient. This ain't over. Maine nodded once, didn't smile, didn't hope. Just filed it all away, same way he did everything else. Chapter 14, Part 3, Fight on the Bus. Summary: on the ride back to Rikers, Maine gets into a fight with one of John's old Jersey hitters. Quick, violent, and bloody. Maine handles it fast, sending another message: he ain't to be played with. The chain bus back to Rikers was hot as hell. No AC, windows barely cracked. Metal seats so cold they burned through the thin jumpsuit fabric. Maine sat near the back, wrists and ankles cuffed, the short length of chain between them making every move awkward and stiff. His head leaned back against the cage wall, eyes half closed, counting every pothole the bus hit like clock ticks. That's when he heard the voice, loud. Too loud, coming from 2 rows up, a Jersey accent, one he recognized. Yo, that's him right there. That's the little nigga who capped C-Money, little fake tough Harlem nigga. Maine's eyes opened slow, didn't move, didn't speak. Just watched the back of the dude's head, Twan, one of John's old dirtbags from Jersey. The same dude Maine used to front work to back when he and John were cool. Twan turned halfway in his seat, looking over his shoulder, grinning wide like he had an audience. Word to everything, you dead food when you get back on the island, lil' man, Twan kept going. Niggas got money on your head. You ain't gonna make it to trial. The other inmates on the bus went quiet, some smirking, some watching like it was free cable. So, driving the bus didn't even flinch. They'd seen this play out before. Maine shifted slow in his seat, straightened his back, let the chain between his wrists drop loose in his lap. And then, without warning, he lunged, twisted up like a coil and launched forward with all the speed he had left in him. Elbow first, cracking Twan right across the nose. Pop. Blood splattered across the side panel of the bus. Twan's head snapped back hard. Before he could react, Maine caught him with two more stiff shots, forehead, chin, then grabbed him by the collar and slammed him face first into the metal divider. Other inmates jumped up yelling, banging on the cage walls. Cuz pulled the emergency brake. Bus screeched to a stop. Get down, get down. The whole bus rocked as Cuz stormed in, yanking Maine backwards, slamming him onto the floor, knee on his neck, cuffs biting deep into his skin. Maine didn't struggle, didn't scream, didn't curse. Just laid there, breathing hard, blood from Twan's busted nose dripping onto his jumpsuit sleeve, eyes wide open, staring at the ceiling of the bus, knowing full well he just sent another message. Chapter 14, Part 4, Reek from Jersey. Summary: Maine reconnects with Reek, an old hustling partner from upstate Jersey. Reek starts holding Maine down inside, commissary, yard watch, small favors, giving Maine some breathing room. The fight on the bus bought Maine a night in the box. 23-hour lockdown, 1 hour out for a shower, food slid under the door like he was a stray animal. When they finally let him back out on the tier, Maine kept his hood low, his shoulders tight and his mind sharper than ever. The whispers traveled faster than the COs did. Dudes were already talking about the bus incident, and for once, they weren't talking reckless. That's when Reek pulled up on him. Maine was posted near the phones, waiting for his 5-minute slot, when Reek walked over from the other side of the day room. Same Reek from Jersey, same dude Maine used to front work to during those Albany runs back in '89. Reek had gained some weight since then, beard thicker, eyes meaner. But the energy was the same. Yo, Maine, Reek said low, pulling up like he wasn't trying to draw attention. Maine turned slow. Yeah, Reek gave a short nod, fist bump tight and quick. Been hearing your name all over this bitch, heard what happened on the bus, heard what happened with C2. Maine didn't say much, just kept watching him. Reek smirked. You good with me, bro, off the strength of back then. I ain't forget how you fed niggas when we ain't have nothing. I'm in 7 billions, few other Jersey cats with me. If you need anything, soap, soups, yard watch, say the word. Maine studied him for a second, then nodded once. Respect. Unspoken, but solid. Over the next few days, Reek kept good on his word. Slid Maine extra packs of ramen and honey buns off commissary, held position near the phones while Maine made short calls, even sat with him during chow, keeping stray eyes from lingering too long. The COs peeped it. So did the other inmates. And slowly, that invisible line around Maine started getting clearer. Do not touch, do not test. He wasn't untouchable, but now, he wasn't standing alone anymore. Chapter 14, Part 5. The story gets out. Summary: as more Harlem inmates hear the full truth about why Maine killed C-Money and all the snakes involved, the hate dies down. Even some dudes who were plotting on Maine fall back. The system may still want him, but on the tier, Maine gets a quiet pass. For now. The thing about Riker's stories traveled faster than fights, faster than COs, faster than paperwork. One day, Maine was still the Harlem kid who killed C-Money, a target. By the next, the whole story started unraveling and spreading like wildfire. It started in the yard. Maine stood near the far gate, posted up with Reek, eyes low but ears open. He heard Duke from Sugar Hill breaking it down for a group of younger Harlem dudes by the pull-up bars. Nah, y'all bugging. That shit was C-Money? That wasn't no backdoor move. Where did C-Line Maine first? I tried to snake him. John was feeding the cops, son. Maine stood tall. He handled it like a soldier. Another dude chimed in. For real, I heard it was some Harlem on Harlem hate type shit. Duke shook his head. Nah, old heads from Uptown co-signing the story now. That little nigga was just trying to survive. They forced his hand. By that afternoon, the tension that had been creeping around Maine's bunk started dying. Dudes who used to mean mug him in the day room now just gave small nods. Some even slapped fives passing by. Nobody was saying he was innocent. Nobody was saying he was a saint. But respect, that part started building. Because in a place like this, they understood one thing better than anything else. Sometimes you got to do dirt to stay breathing. And at 19, with a body count, fed charges, and no co-defendants, Maine was standing taller than half the grown men on the tier. That night, Laying on his bunk, staring at the ceiling, shank under his mattress, Maine let out one slow breath. No smile, no tears, just that same cold calculation. Tomorrow? Tomorrow would come with its own problems. But tonight, he was still here and inside these walls. That was a win by itself. Chapter 15, Part 1, The Plea Offer. Summary. Miss Latham visits Maine and Rikers with paperwork, 15 years flat. Take it now or face trial and a potential life sentence. Maine barely reacts, but inside panic builds. The attorney room smelled like cold coffee and bad decisions. Metal chairs. A scratched-up table bolted to the floor. Maine sat with both hands cuffed in front of him, orange jumpsuit riding high on his ankles, staring at the faded graffiti carved into the tabletop. Never fold. The irony made his stomach twist. Miss Latham walked in looking more tired than usual. Her blazer was wrinkled at the shoulders, hair pulled back like she hadn't slept in 2 days. She dropped a thick manila folder onto the table between them, gave him one long look, then exhaled slow. "This is it," she said, sliding the papers across to him. Maine didn't move, didn't touch them, just stared. 15 flat, she said, voice low but firm. "Plead guilty today. They'll drop the top charge. No trial, no life sentence. You'll do your time, Jermaine. But you'll come home in your 30s. She sat down across from him, lacing her fingers together on the table. "Refuse this, and you roll the dice. If we go to trial and lose, they're going to bury you. 25 to life, maybe more." Maine kept his breathing slow, stone face on the outside, but inside, his heart was pounding. 15 years, 15. By the time he walked free again, the world would look nothing like the one he knew. Friends dead. Keisha, gone. Ashley, maybe still there. But who knew? His block changed. Whole city different. Miss Latham pulled a cheap blue pen from her purse, clicked it twice, and placed it on top of the paperwork. Then she leaned back in her chair. "This is your call, Maine," she said quietly. "You want to be stubborn? Fine. But if you take this plea, you walk out of here one day." Maine's eyes drifted down to the papers. His name typed at the top in bold. "People versus Jermaine Carter." The words blurred for a second as his chest tightened. For the first time since this whole thing started, Maine felt something real, and it felt like drowning. Chapter 15, Part 2, Keisha's Letter. Summary. A CO slides Maine a single envelope back in his cell. Keisha's handwriting. Her first real word since Oakland. Emotional, bittersweet, and hard to read. Maine reads it twice. The tear was loud as usual. Cause yelling. Radios crackling. Somebody arguing over the phone 3 cells down. Maine sat on the edge of his bunk, elbows on his knees, lost in thought, staring at the floor like it owed him something. That's when Co Rivera walked by, stopping just long enough to slap a small white envelope onto Maine's bed. "Mail, Carter." Rivera kept walking. Didn't wait for thanks. Didn't expect one. Maine picked up the envelope slow. No return address. But the handwriting? He knew it the second he saw it. Keisha. Soft curves in the letters. A little slant to the right like she always wrote when she was rushing. Maine's throat tightened. For a second, he just held it, staring, almost scared to open it. But finally, with shaking fingers, he tore it open. The letter wasn't long, maybe 4 or 5 paragraphs, folded twice like she'd rewritten it more than once before sending. Her words hit him soft, but deep. "Maine, I don't even know how to start this. I've been hearing what's happening. I heard about the court dates, about the plea. I couldn't sit in that courtroom and watch you in chains. I ain't built for that. I'm sorry for going quiet. I just needed to breathe. I still love you, always will. But I had to choose peace for me and my family. You was a boy trying to be a man, and now you paying for it like one. I pray for you every night. Stay strong." And Keisha. Maine sat there staring at the paper, reading it twice, then a third time. The words blurred halfway through. But he didn't let himself cry. Not here. Not now. He folded the letter tight, slipped it under his mattress next to the shank, and laid back, eyes on the ceiling, mind somewhere between regret and resolve. Chapter 15, Part 3, Ashley's loyalty. Summary. Ashley visits during his next window. She sits across the glass, promises she's riding for him, whether he takes the plea or fights. Her energy is different from Keisha's. Harder, street loyal, stubborn. The visitation room smelled like bleach and sweat. Phones crackled. Metal stools scraped against the floor as inmates shuffled in one by one, all wearing the same orange jumpsuits, all carrying the same tired look in their eyes. Maine walked in slow, cuffs still on his wrist, Cole guiding him by the elbow like he was half-dead property. They sat him at booth 12, far side of the room, back to the wall. He looked up through the scratched glass, and there she was, Ashley. Braids pulled back in a messy ponytail, oversized Philly hoodie, gold bamboo earrings swinging as she adjusted herself on the seat. Her eyes, puffy like she hadn't slept, but locked straight on him like she never left. Maine picked up the phone first. Ashley grabbed her receiver before the dial tone even finished. Neither of them spoke for the first few seconds, just stared at each other through the glass like it was both a barrier and the only thing holding them together. "I heard about the plea," she said first, voice low but steady. Maine nodded slow, her lips pressed tight like she wanted to scream but wouldn't. "I don't care what you do," she said finally. "If you take it, I'm riding. If you don't, I'm still riding." Her eyes glistened but didn't break. "I didn't come all the way from Philly to let you drown by yourself." Maine let out a slow breath, gripping the phone tighter. "I ain't built to lose, Ash," she said, voice low. "I know you ain't," she shot back. "That's why I'm here." They sat like that for a minute, phones pressed to ears, just breathing, just holding each other up, without touching. When the CO called time's up, Ashley stayed on the line one beat longer than allowed. "I love you, Maine," she said. Click. She hung up, stood, gave him one last look, and walked out. Maine stayed sitting, phone still at his ear, staring at the empty space she left behind. Chapter 15, Part 4, Night Before Decision. Summary. Maine lies awake on his bunk, replaying everything. Keisha, Ashley, C-Money, Harlem, Oakland, Detroit. Heart racing, mind twisting, the decision looming. Lights out hit at 9:30 p.m., but Maine didn't close his eyes. Couldn't. The noise of Rikers kept thumping around him. Dudes arguing 2 tiers over, a CO yelling for medical, somebody kicking a cell door out of frustration or fear, or both. But inside Maine's head, it was even louder. He laid flat on his bunk, hands folded behind his head, staring at the rusted ceiling vent. The shank stayed under the mattress like always. But tonight, it wasn't about survival. It was about decision. Keisha's letter sat folded under his pillow. He'd read it 3 times since Chow, could still hear her voice in his head. "I still love you, but I had to choose peace." That line sat heavy on his chest like a cinder block. Then there was Ashley. The glass between them during visitation felt like both punishment and protection. She wasn't going nowhere, but Maine knew even her loyalty had a clock ticking behind it. And then the faces. C-Money, Lido, John, Trell, Reek, every gunshot, every bag flipped, every long drive down on -5 with work stuffed in duffels. Oakland, Detroit, the clubs, the dice games, the shootouts, the laughs, the heartbreaks, the betrayals. Maine's stomach knotted. His hands curled into fists under his head. 15 years. 15. By the time he touched air again, he'd be 34. Maybe older if they stacked on any other charges. But the other option? Trial. Lose. And he'd be in here forever. He exhaled slow, closed his eyes, and whispered to himself, "Don't fold, just choose." Chapter 15, Part 5, Signing the Plea. Summary. Maine sits across from M.S. Latham, stares at the plea papers, then finally picks up the pen and signs for 15 years flat. The attorney room felt smaller than usual. Air stale, walls closing in. Miss Latham sat across from Maine, paperwork already spread out, pen sitting dead center like it was waiting to ruin somebody's life. She looked at him long and hard. No pep talk this time, no last-minute push. Just that tired lawyer face that said, "It's on you now." Maine sat motionless, her elbows on the table, eyes fixed on the line where his signature was supposed to go. Name printed at the top, Jermaine Carter, charge sheet attached behind it like a rap sheet obituary. 15 years flat, no parole for the first 10. Do the math, no more guessing games, no more trial, just straight time. He reached up, ran a hand across his face, let out a slow, bitter laugh, more air than humor. 15, he said out loud, tasting the word like it was poison. Miss Latham stayed quiet, just pushed the pen closer. Maine picked it up, felt the weight of it like it was a gun, paused, just for a breath, then dropped his signature quick and sharp like he was ripping off a bandage. First line, second line, initials on the bottom corner, done. Sealed, life changed. Miss Latham grabbed the papers, clipped them together, and stood up fast like she didn't want to give him a second to change his mind. I'll file this with the court today, she said. You'll get your sentencing date next week. Stay ready. She left without another word. Maine sat there, staring at the empty space where the pen had been, hands shaking just a little, but chest still holding strong. Decision made. Now it was just about surviving the calendar. Chapter 16, Part 1, Sentencing Day. Summary: Maine goes before the judge, officially gets sentenced to 15 years. The courtroom is tense, but Maine stays stone-faced. The courtroom felt smaller than last time, or maybe it was just Maine's mind playing tricks again. Same wood-paneled walls, same tired bailiff standing near the door, same cold air pumping through the vents like punishment. But this time, it wasn't about motions or discovery. This was it, sentencing day. Maine sat at the defense table, ankles shackled to the floor, wrists chained at the waist. Miss Latham sat beside him, flipping through papers one last time, but she already knew this was just theater now. The judge shuffled in from chambers, glasses low on his nose, looking at Maine like he'd seen 1,000 kids just like him, and planned to see 1,000 more. All rise. The room stood. Maine stood too, stiff and silent. Kept his eyes straight ahead. No Ashley in the gallery. No Keisha. No family. Just a few random observers, 2 reporters scribbling, and one dude from Harlem Maine didn't recognize, posted in the back row with a hoodie pulled low. The judge cleared his throat, voice flat like this was just another case number on the docket. Mr. Carter, you've entered a guilty plea to charges of manslaughter, criminal possession of a weapon, and criminal sale of a controlled substance. Pause. Short breath. I'm sentencing you to 15 years flat with eligibility for supervised release after 10, minus any good time credits, assuming you stay out of trouble. Gavel dropped once, sharp, final, like a nail getting slammed into a coffin lid. Maine didn't blink, didn't flinch, just stood there, staring at nothing, feeling everything, and nothing at the same time. Miss Latham leaned over, voice low near his ear. I'll file your transfer paperwork this week. Get ready. Downstate next. Maine gave the smallest nod. The CO behind him tapped him on the shoulder. Let's go. As he walked out the courtroom, head up, chain dragging at his ankles, Maine heard one voice from the back row, low and fast. Hold your head, little man. Do that time. Don't let it do you. Maine didn't turn to see who said it. Didn't have to. The message was already locked in. Chapter 16, Part 2, Downstate Blues. Summary: Maine arrives at Downstate Correctional, gets processed, stripped, and thrown into a holding block with lifers and short-timers all mixed together. The bus ride upstate felt longer than it actually was. Steel cuffs locked tight, waist chain stiff, leg shackles rubbing raw at the ankles. Maine sat by the window, head leaned against the glass, watching the buildings turn to trees. City skyline fade to empty freeway, then woods, then nothing. By the time they pulled through the gates at Downstate Correctional Facility, the sun was already dipping low. A long line of buses parked crooked in the intake lot, like graveyard hearses waiting for bodies. Coes yelled orders before the doors even swung open. Keep your heads down, keep your hands visible. Move when we tell you to move. Maine stepped off the bus slow, blinking against the cold air, heart thudding but face still stone cold. Intake was humiliation on loop. First the strip search. Every inch of his body checked. Cuz barking like drill sergeant. Squat, cough, lift your sack, turn around, spread 'em. Then came the shower line, freezing water. Bars of soap so cheap they barely lathered, dudes standing shoulder to shoulder, heads down, silent. The whole block smelled like mildew and sweat. After that, new clothes, state greens this time, no more orange. Dock number stitched above the left pocket, par 91, a 30,156. It didn't even feel like a name anymore. Just digits. Another piece of inventory. They marched them down a long corridor, paint peeling off the walls, floors slick with dirt tracked in from the yard. Finally, Maine landed in a holding dorm. Cots lined tight. No privacy. Dudes from all over. Brooklyn, Queens, Buffalo, Albany, Yonkers. Young kids like him. And old lifers with faces carved up like tree bark. Some looking at the floor. Some staring right at him, sizing him up like fresh meat. Maine found a corner bunk. Sat on the edge, hands clasped tight, shank tucked in his sock. A new one Reek had slid him before transfer, and he waited, eyes open, mind locked in, knowing full well this was just the beginning. Chapter 16, Part 3, Bam from Harlem. Summary: Maine gets pulled for a yard conversation with Bam, an older Harlem OG doing 30 to life. Bam breaks it down for him, how to survive state time without getting caught up in other dudes' wars. The yard at downstate wasn't big, just a stretch of cracked concrete surrounded by razor wire and 2 guard towers. A few faded pull-up bars off to the side, benches covered in bird shit, and inmates moving in slow patterns like clock hands, walking the track, lifting weights, or posted in corners talking in low voices. Maine stayed near the wall, arms folded, watching everything but pretending like he wasn't watching at all. New spot, new politics, new dangers. He already felt a couple eyes on him from the minute he stepped out the tunnel gate, but he kept his posture tight. No fear, no weakness. That's when Bam pulled up. Old Harlem head, salt and pepper beard, glasses with one lens cracked. Dude had to be pushing 50 easy. Doing 30 to life for a double homicide from the late 70s. But even now, dudes moved out of his way when he walked through the yard, respect still intact. Bam sat down slow on the bench near Maine, pulled a cigarette from behind his ear, lit it with shaky fingers, then blew the smoke out in one long drag. "Ayo, you Carter, right?" Bam said, eyes squinting against the sun. Maine didn't flinch. "Who's asking?" Bam chuckled. "Relax, little man. Ain't here for no funny shit. I'm Bam Harlem. Before your time. But I know your story." Maine stayed silent. Bam kept going. "Word traveled faster in here than on the block. Heard what you did. Heard why you did it. A lot of politics behind it. But I ain't here for all that." He flicked ash to the ground, voice dropping low. "I'm here to tell you this. You young. Got years ahead. You move reckless in here. You ain't making it out, period." Maine nodded once, listening but keeping his face blank. Bam kept talking. "Stay out the cliques. Don't ride for nobody but yourself. Don't jump in other niggas' wars. You hear me? Eat your food. Get your push-ups in. Mind your business. Keep your knife close. But only pull it if you're ready to use it." Maine let that sit for a second, then gave a slow nod. "I hear you." Bam stood, flicked the cigarette butt to the dirt. "Good. Stay sharp, little man. Harlem looking at you. Even in here." Without waiting for a reply, Bam walked off, leaving Maine sitting there, mind racing, but game received. Chapter 16, Part 4, State Politics. Summary: Maine starts observing the racial and set politics inside. Crips, Bloods, Latin Kings, and others all control different parts of the prison schedule. Phones, chow hall seating, rec yards. Maine stays solo, playing chess, but keeping his knife close. The yard politics at downstate were louder than the COs. Didn't matter where you stood, everything was color-coded, click-watched, and rule-bound. The Bloods controlled the main phones by the weight pit. The Crips had the far corner by the pull-up bars. The Latin Kings ran the card tables near the CO tower. And everybody else? You found a corner, or you got stepped on. Maine kept it simple, stayed near the track, walked slow, watched everything, spoke to nobody unless it was necessary. Reek stayed checking in when he could, giving quiet nods across the yard. Bam sat near the chess tables, always with 2 books open, always keeping one eye on Maine like a distant uncle, making sure the kid didn't drown. One afternoon, while waiting for his phone slot, Maine caught two younger dudes beefing over a commissary debt. One swung first. The other pulled steel from under his waistband. By the time COs hit the yard, one was leaking from the neck, face pressed into the dirt like forgotten trash. No alarms, no warnings, just fast violence and fast cleanup. That night, Maine laid on his bunk, knife still tucked, mind racing. 15 years of this, unless something changed, unless he changed it. End of Chapter 16, Part 4, State Politics. Chapter 16, Part 5, The Transfer Bus. Summary. The chapter ends with Maine shackled again, loaded onto the dock bus, riding toward his permanent prison assignment. The bus rumbles through upstate New York snow on the roads, Maine staring out the foggy windows, silent but locked in. The transfer bus smelled like sweat, fear, and old steel. Same shackles on his ankles, same waist chain biting into his stomach. Another long ride, only this time, they weren't bringing him back. They were sending him deeper. Upstate, Elmira Correctional, max security. Reek had dapped him up that morning before chow, pulled him in close for a quick word, keep your head on swivel, bro. It's a whole different war up there. Maine just nodded. Didn't have the energy for long goodbyes. As the bus rumbled through the Catskills, Maine leaned against the window, watching snow pile up along the sides of the road, trees passing like blurs, whole stretches of highway with nothing but gray sky and frozen dirt. He didn't think about Harlem, didn't think about Keisha, didn't think about Ashley, didn't think about C-Money. He just sat there, quiet, mind locked, waiting to see what the next battlefield would look like. End of Chapter 16, Part 5, The Transfer Bus. Epilogue, clock still ticking. His new cell was smaller than the last one. Concrete walls, small slit window facing a yard covered in ice. 2 bunks. His cellie, a quiet dude from Syracuse, barely said 2 words. Maine unpacked his state-issued blanket, tucked his shank under the mattress, and sat on the edge of the bed. That night, as lights went out, he taped a calendar page to the wall. Day 1. First scratch made with the edge of a plastic spoon. Just before he laid down, CO slid a piece of mail under the door. No return address. Just a single line written on the envelope. Keep breathing. A. Maine stared at it for a long time, then slid it under his pillow and closed his eyes. Born in a hole-in-the-wall apartment in Harlem, 1973, Jermaine Carter, better known as Maine, never stood a chance at a normal life. Raised by a mother lost to heroin, survival became his only language. By 12, he was running packs for C-Money, Harlem's infamous street boss. By 15, Maine had his first Benz and more money than most grown men. But with fast money came faster enemies. When loyalty turned into betrayal, Maine pulled the trigger that changed everything, putting C-Money in the dirt and placing a target on his own back from Harlem to Philly to Cali, from Long Beach alleys to Oakland corners. And finally, the cold streets of Detroit, Maine ran from bullets, cops, and ghosts from his past until the feds caught up. Now at just 19, locked behind bars, Maine faces 15 years of hard time. But this isn't the end. It's just a new battlefield. In a world where the only rule is survival, how long can a kid from Harlem keep beating the odds?